Evening, lads. Mason here. Welcome back to the Fall Asleep podcast, your quiet place for the haunted, the paranormal, and the things best left half seen. We've walked through many stories together, hauntings, curses, possessions, but tonight's episode takes us somewhere different. Not into one house or one haunting, but into something far older, far more dangerous. The power to see what should remain unseen. Every culture has warned against it. Every era has stories of those who tried. Some found only madness, others found something looking back. During the research for this episode, I found patterns that stretched across centuries, from English churchyards to French pyres, from Victorian mirrors to New Orleans altars. Every culture warned about the same thing, that the gift of foresight is never free, that to see what's coming is to invite the darkness that guards it. So tonight we trace that danger through history, through mirrors that show death, through bones that speak, through cursed decks of cards and modern obsessions with knowing what tomorrow holds. It's an episode that begins like folklore and ends as philosophy. A long, quiet journey through the price of prophecy, cursed fortunes, and the shadow of foreknowledge. Before we begin, a quick thank you to everyone supporting the channel, and the wonderful comments you all have been leaving lately. I do try to read every one of them. The goal is 20,000 subscribers, and every new listener helps keep these stories alive. If you haven't yet, hit that button. It means more than you know. Now settle in, dim the lights, let the world fall away, and listen closely. In 1993, a Malaysian politician seeking greater power turned to a former pop singer who claimed she could alter his future through witchcraft. Her name was Mona Fandey. Maslan Idris was told that money, protection, and political influence could be brought to him through ritual. He trusted her enough to travel to an unfinished house in rural Pahang and take part in ceremonies away from the public eye. Then he disappeared. What followed involved whispered incantations, strange objects said to carry supernatural power, huge cash withdrawals, disturbing discoveries beneath the house, and reports that Maslan had been seen alive after investigators believed he was already dead. And the deeper police went, the more frightening the story became. This is genuinely one of the most insane, true and disturbing cases I have ever covered. I don't say that often, especially considering how many paranormal cases we cover on this podcast, but this one genuinely sent chills down my spine. The complete story of Mona Fandey is available now exclusively on Patreon. Click the Patreon link in the description below to listen to the full case. This case is the latest addition to our growing library of Patreon-exclusive episodes, joining 8 other equally terrifying and controversial paranormal cases. Head over to Patreon today to unlock the complete archive of more than 100 episodes, ad-free listening, and early access to every new release. The Fall Asleep podcast on Patreon is your Netflix for scary podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Now back to the video.
I've been expecting you. You're listening to the Fall Asleep podcast.
A single candle flickers in the darkness. In its wavering light, shadows dance on ancient stone walls. Imagine a temple at Delphi in the dead of night 2,000 years ago. The air heavy with incense, a priestess breathing deep of sweet bay leaves and volcanic fumes. She sways in trance, eyes half open to visions beyond mortal sight. Supplicants kneel at her feet, trembling, desperate for a glimpse of what is to come. Outside, in the pale moonlight, the Aegean wind sighs through the olive groves as if echoing the god's distant whisper. In that hush, a question hangs. Do you truly wish to know what the future holds? Now drift forward in time and distance. Picture a medieval seaside village centuries later, where a storm rages against a tiny shack on the dunes. Inside, an old woman, a sea witch the locals call her, peers into a basin of water lit only by a fat tallow candle. The flame's reflection quivers on the water's surface as she scries, seeking answers for the fisherfolk who come to her. Her lips move in a silent prayer or maybe a spell, Outside, waves crash and the brine-laden wind howls. The fishermen's wives wait in the cold, clutching their shawls tighter, yearning to hear whether their husbands will return safely with the morning tide. They know it's forbidden by church and custom to consort with a wise woman, a reader of fortunes, and yet the temptation to know outweighs their fear. The need for certainty in an uncertain world leads them, as it has led so many before, to the flicker of candlelight and the promise of prophecy. Now come closer to our own time. Envision a busy city street at midnight, perhaps in New York or London, empty of people but alive with neon. Amid the towering buildings and asphalt, one sign glows persistently. Psychic, palm and card readings. Its red neon letters buzz faintly. Behind the glass, a woman sits at a small round table draped in purple velvet. The streetlight outside falls across her tarot deck, spread in a fan of illustrated cards. A lone seeker, a young man, face drawn with worry, sits opposite her. He has slipped in after dinner, unable to resist that old itch of anxiety. What if I could know? The psychic turns the cards one by one, candlelight reflecting in her eyes. Perhaps an expression of concern crosses her face at what she sees. The young man holds his breath. Cars hiss by on wet pavement outside, but in this cramped parlor, the world narrows to the pattern of cards, the hush between seer and client, and the ageless exchange of uncertainty for a story, a hint, a promise of what's to come. Since the dawn of consciousness, humankind has reached out for knowledge of the future, like a child reaching for a flame. We are singular among creatures in understanding the concept of tomorrow, and with that understanding comes fear, hope, and the insatiable curiosity to pierce the veil of time. Every culture, every era, devised its own ways to glean tomorrow's secrets. The methods vary wildly. In ancient Rome, the haruspex examined the entrails of a sacrificed goat, interpreting the liver's shape as a divine text of omens. In China, royal diviners in the Shang dynasty inscribed questions on oracle bones and heated them until they cracked, reading the fissures as answers from ancestral spirits. The Norse cast rune stones, the Celts listened to the cryptic songs of birds, seers of West Africa threw consecrated cowrie shells, and Indian astrologers plotted the movements of planets against a person's birth with intricate mathematics and mysticism. On every continent, the act is the same at heart, to entice a hint of order from the chaos of what has not yet happened, to seek reassurance that the seasons will turn, the crops will grow, that love will be found, that death can be seen coming and perhaps bargained with. It is a universal impulse, and yet across those same cultures and eras runs an equally strong admonition: do not delve too deeply. A thread of warning weaves through our myth and memory, suggesting that the knowledge we seek may come at a steep price. The flame that illuminates may also burn. One of the oldest written warnings comes from the Bible, Deuteronomy 18:10-12, where the ancient Hebrews were told in no uncertain terms, "Let no one be found among you who practices divination or interprets omens, for whoever does these things is an abomination." In those stern lines, we sense the fear of unleashing forces beyond human control. The prohibition was absolute, stoning the punishment for any medium or soothsayer, because to seek forbidden knowledge was to stray from God's protection into perilous territory. The implication was clear: some things mortals are not meant to know. The future belongs to God or the gods, and prying into it might invite demons and ruin. Yet the warnings hardly ended with the Bible. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, catalogued all manner of magic and divination in his natural history. Though fascinated, Pliny often cast a skeptical eye on these practices. He recounted, for instance, the multitude of charlatans promising glimpses of destiny for a price, and he cautioned that people's credulity could be easily abused. In one passage, Pliny practically sighed across the millennia. So great is the human passion for forbidden knowledge, but equally great is the folly attached to it. Even as he debunked certain claims, like the notion that a sorcerer could summon lightning, or that the flight of birds unerringly told the fate of empires, Pliny acknowledged how common and tempting these beliefs were. Romans of every rank, from peasants to emperors, consulted augurs and astrologers, and on rare occasions prophecy seemed uncannily accurate, which only fed the flame. After all, Julius Caesar had been famously warned by a seer to beware the Ides of March. He ignored the prophecy and met his doom on that very date. These stories reminded Pliny's readers that perhaps some forbidden knowledge could be real, and that was even more reason to be wary, for genuine prophecy could be as dangerous as any curse. Through the medieval and Renaissance periods, the refrain continued. The early Christian church fathers repeatedly condemned divination as consorting with evil. St. Augustine in the 5th century wrote that seeking out a fortune teller was opening a door to demons who masquerade as the spirits of the dead or of the gods to deceive the unwary. In darkened huts and royal courts alike, the devout were urged to shun soothsayers. Yet ironically, even popes peeked at horoscopes, and kings kept court astrologers, often under euphemisms like mathematician to avoid scandal. There was ever a gap between official doctrine and private desperation to know what tomorrow might bring. The very superstition the church tried to stamp out lived on robustly in whispers and midnight rituals, especially among the common folk for whom every drought or plague made the future a question of life and death. By the Age of Enlightenment, one might think the old fears had been banished by reason, but the 18th and 19th centuries introduced their own laws and law about fortune-telling, a curious mix of skepticism and lingering dread. The Witchcraft Act of 1735 in Great Britain, for example, no longer burned witches at the stake. Instead, it declared that claiming magical or clairvoyant powers was fraudulent. In effect, it said, witches and fortune-tellers don't exist, and those who pretend they do shall be punished for lying. Yet even that rationalist approach carried a shadow. The very need for such a law hinted that fortune-tellers still prowled city streets and country fairs, and enough people believed in them to warrant legal action. Later, the Vagrancy Act of 1824 in England doubled down, labelling every person pretending or professing to tell fortunes, or using any subtle craft to deceive and impose on others, as a rogue and vagabond to be fined or imprisoned. On paper, these laws treated prophecy as a con game, but in the shadows among ordinary people, the age-old whispers persisted that messing with fate could bring misfortune. A law might call you a cheat, but superstition might still call you cursed. Consider also how prophecy is treated in folklore. The cautionary tales abound. Across Europe, one finds variations of the legend of a man who is granted the ability to see the future, often by a deal with the devil, only to find this gift brings him nothing but sorrow. Perhaps he foresees his loved ones' deaths and can do nothing to prevent them, living in torturous anticipation. Or he tries to avoid a predicted misfortune, and by his very actions causes it to come to pass. The Greek myths gave us Cassandra, daughter of King Priam of Troy, blessed with true visions of the future, yet cursed that no one would ever believe her. Her prophecies of Troy's destruction were mocked. She was labeled mad, and when the doom she foresaw arrived, Cassandra herself was dragged into slavery and eventually murdered. The lesson: insight without the power to change anything is a cruel burden. Knowledge, in her case, led only to despair. Even in fairy tales told to children, we often encounter the motif of the dangerous prophecy. The princess pricks her finger on a spindle on her 16th birthday, despite all precautions, for so it was foretold in Sleeping Beauty. The man who hears a prophecy of great fortune engages in reckless behavior that ruins him. The woman who consults a forbidden mirror or enchanted lake to glimpse her fate sees an image that drives her to madness. These narratives, whether delivered from a pulpit or a fireside, all circle the same fire. There are some things we are not meant to know. Pull back the curtain on destiny, even slightly, and who knows what might peer back at you, or how it might alter the course of your life. Yet for all these warnings, we cannot deny the enduring allure that prophecy holds. The flicker of that candle in the dark is mesmerizing. The unknown is frightening, yes, but also enticing in its possibility. How many of us, presented with a sealed envelope that contained the story of our future, could resist opening it? Could you? Would it be a blessing to see ahead, to avoid the pitfalls, seize the opportunities, or would it prove a curse that haunts your every living moment? It is a profound human dilemma, the conflict between our curiosity and our caution, between hope and fear. To explore this dilemma, one must step into the shoes of those who have sought or delivered a glimpse beyond the veil. Tonight, as the world quiets and the hour grows late, we will walk down the corridors of history and folklore, visiting people and places where prophecy played a fateful role. We will sit with the hopeful and the haunted, the frauds and the faithful, in humble cottages and grand salons, in churchyards and swamps and city streets. These are stories of cursed fortunes and the shadow of foreknowledge, moments when a single glimpse of what might be changed everything in the lives of those who sought it. As we journey through these tales, let the atmosphere settle around you, the soft crackle of the hearth in a Yorkshire parlour on a chilly spring night, the damp mossy silence of a French graveyard where bones whisper of revenge, the gaslit study of a Victorian spiritualist trembling at what he has called forth in his mirror, the humid, perfumed air of a New Orleans night as cards slap the table and a voodoo queen's eyes flash with vision, the dusty road in the Carpathians under a pale moon where a Romany woman's warning hangs in the wind, and the modern glow of a computer screen where someone lonely and afraid awaits the typed words of an online psychic reading, heart pounding as if it were the oracle of Delphi itself. In each of these moments, knowledge and fate perform their eerie dance. Sometimes the prophecy is fulfilled with tragic irony. Sometimes the mere act of prophesying seems to invite calamity, and always there lingers a question: did knowing help, or did it doom them? Settle in and listen carefully, for these cautionary tales carry the weight of years and tears. They urge us to ponder what the price of prophecy truly is. With each story, the candle burns lower, its light perhaps a little wiser, a little more hesitant. By the end of our journey, when the last flame gutters out, we may not have definitive answers, but we will have seen the patterns, the subtle law that echoes through time. The future does not give up its secrets lightly. To seek knowledge of what is to come is to reach into the darkness, and one must be prepared for the darkness to reach back. Tonight, as we stand at the threshold of the unknown, remember the old adage whispered in many tongues: be careful what you wish to know, for the knowing may change everything. With that in mind, let us begin our travels, starting in a quiet English village on a special ghostly night of the year, where young hearts sought romantic promises and instead found chilling omens in the mirror's reflection. A damp cold clings to the stones of the Yorkshire cottage, although it is late April. Outside, the fields are silvered with moonlight and frost. A thin mist creeps along the ground, softening the edges of gravestones in the distant churchyard. It is St. Mark's Eve in the year 1823, a night when an uncanny hush falls over this little parish. By day, the village is unremarkable, farmers tending sheep on the dales, the blacksmith's hammer ringing out by the forge, children trudging to the one-room schoolhouse. But as the sun set earlier, an uneasy excitement kindled among certain young folk. For local tradition whispers that St. Mark's Eve is no ordinary night. It is a time when the veil between present and future wears thin, when one might peer through and catch sight of what fate intends. Inside the candlelit parlour of the Briggs farmhouse, two sisters prepare for a ritual both thrilling and fearsome. Ellen Briggs, the younger at 19, sits before a sturdy wooden mirror propped on the table. The mirror's surface, slightly tarnished by age, reflects the dim flicker of a tallow candle set beside it. Ellen's own face, pale and determined, gazes back at her. Behind her stands her older sister Mary, equally nervous, hands resting on Ellen's shoulders for support. They have spent the day in semi-fasting, nibbling only a crust of bread and salt, as instructed by an old rhyme their mother once recited. Their mother herself does not approve of this custom. She muttered prayers under her breath when she realized what night it was, but she also left out a dish of supper on the hearth for them should they need it. It's as if even she, who calls it superstition, half believes in the power of St. Mark's Eve. The custom is this: if a maid truly wishes to see her future husband, she must perform certain rites on the eve of St. Mark's Day, which falls on April 25th. One method known in Yorkshire calls for the young woman to stay awake and watch in a darkened room with a mirror at midnight, having eaten nothing all day and spoken not a word. A dumb vigil of sorts. At the stroke of 12, if done correctly, she might see over her shoulder in the mirror the face of the man she will marry, or so the village girls whisper to each other. Another variation says she should wash a shift, a smock at midnight and hang it to dry by the hearth. As the rhyme goes, on St. Mark's Eve at 12 o'clock, the fair maid will watch her smock, to find her husband in the dark by praying unto good St. Mark. In that version, the ghostly figure of her future love is supposed to enter silently and turn the drying garment, as a helpful husband would. It is all spoken of in giggling tones by the dairymaids and seamstresses, half in jest, half in hope. It sounds innocent, even charming, like a game, but beneath the chatter lies an older, more solemn layer of belief that on this night other, less kindly apparitions also roam. Some say that on St. Mark's Eve, if one keeps vigil at the church porch between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., one will see the spectral processions of those who will die in the coming year, each wraith-like form entering the church in grim silence. Such a vigil is not for the faint of heart. There are tales of people who attempted it and nearly lost their wits at the sight of their neighbours' ghosts, or worse, at the sight of their own spectre trudging in among the doomed. Indeed, an authentic case is often told in Yorkshire of an old woman in Scarborough who, on St. Mark's Eve of 1786, watched from the shadows of St. Mary's churchyard as figure after phantom figure glided towards the church door. She recognised each one, despite the winding sheets, villagers who to all appearances were alive and well that spring night. Heart-pounding, she counted them. One by one they vanished inside the church. She thought the dreadful parade was over when suddenly a final figure turned and looked directly at her. In the gloom, she discerned a face, her own face, staring back at her, pale as a corpse. The old woman let out a terrible scream and collapsed. Though carried home and revived, she did not long survive the shock, as the story goes. The implication was that by seeing her own fate, she had sealed it. Such is the dark side of St. Mark's Eve, spoken in hushed tones. If you peer too eagerly into fate's mirror, you might catch a glimpse of the grave, but the Briggs sisters, like many youths, focus on the brighter possibility, a glimpse of love. After all, they are performing the more benign ritual, not in a cold churchyard among ghosts, but in the familiar warmth of their home, seeking something happy, a betrothal, not doom. And yet, a quiver of fear is undeniable as the clock ticks toward midnight. Mary leans close and whispers, "Ellen, are you sure you want to do this?" We can stop now. Her Yorkshire accent is soft and lilting, but edged with worry. The candle's flame shudders a little in a draught, casting elongated shadows across the low ceiling beams. Ellen swallows. She can feel her heart racing. She realizes her palms are damp. She wipes them on her apron. "I'll be fine," she whispers back, careful to keep her voice low. Raising one's voice or laughing is said to break the spell. In truth, her bravado is wavering. Part of her desperately wants to see him. The future him, whoever he may be. Perhaps it's the lad from the next farm who smiled at her in church, or the baker's son in town who always slips an extra biscuit into her basket. Her cheeks flush at the thought, but another part of her remembers a cautionary tale their grandmother once told by the fireside. A local girl, years ago, looked into a mirror on this very night, hoping to see her fiancé's face, and instead saw a skull peering over her shoulder. That girl, said grandmother, was found the next morning in a state of utter terror, the mirror fallen and cracked. She fell ill with a fever soon after and never recovered, convinced, people said, that the skull's apparition was an omen of her own death. At the time, Ellen had dismissed it as a ghost story meant to scare children. But now, seated before the silent mirror, she wonders. The silence is so deep she can hear the old house timbers creak and the muffled hoot of an owl outside. Mary, unable to share Ellen's burden yet, unwilling to leave her alone, grips her shoulders a tad tighter. Both sisters stare intently at the mirror's dark surface. Only the one candle on the side is lit. Another stands unlit on the table, ready to be struck at the proper moment if needed. The remedy, according to law, for any frightening vision is to instantly light a new candle. It's like a reset, breaking the spell of the vigil. They've prepared for every eventuality, it seems. Still, nothing prepares one fully for the moment of truth. The clock in the hall begins to chime midnight. The deep, resonant gongs echo through the house. 1, 2, 3. Mary counts under her breath until 12. At that final stroke, Ellen inhales sharply and peers deeper into the mirror, summoning every scrap of courage. She has prayed to St. Mark, patron of this eerie eve, begging for a kind vision. The flame behind her flutters again, as if in answer, and for a moment the mirror shows nothing more than that golden blur. Ellen blinks, holding her eyes wide, trying not to blink again, not to break concentration. Her own face is a pale oval in the glass, her brown eyes searching. The tiny room grows colder. Ellen can see her breath clouding in the mirror's reflection. Mary notices it too. A sudden chill is swept through, as if a door to winter opened. The candle flame shrinks, almost guttering. Then Mary's nails dig involuntarily into Ellen's shoulder. Something moves in the mirror. Ellen sees it at the same instant, a shape forming just behind her reflection, over her left shoulder where Mary's face should be. But it is not Mary. Mary's wide eyes and bonnet are visible on the right side, behind Ellen's other shoulder. To the left, however, there is a shadow, indistinct at first. Ellen leans forward a fraction, scarcely breathing. The shadow grows clearer, resolving into what looks like a human figure, tall and dark. Could this be her future husband's spirit come to reveal himself? Her heart gives a hopeful jolt. The figure stands silently and the features become a touch clearer. A pale blur for a face, perhaps a man's face, but odd. He seems to be wearing some kind of hood or shroud that obscures details. "Do you see him?" Ellen whispers, forgetting that she was meant to stay silent. Mary sees something, that is clear. Her face has gone as white as milk, her mouth parted in a silent gasp. The figure in the mirror begins to lean forward, as if to peer over Ellen's shoulder and meet her gaze in the reflection. Ellen feels an ice-cold presence at her back, though she dares not turn around to look directly. The candle flame stretches upward, thin and eerily still now, casting a very faint glow over what appears to be a gaunt face with deep-set eyes. It is no lover's face. A sudden dread grips Ellen's heart. The eyes, she can't make out their color, only that they are dark, sunken, and they are looking into hers through the mirror with a kind of hungry intensity. Mary stifles a whimper behind her. The sisters are paralyzed, caught between the desire to flee and the morbid fascination of the vision. Then the apparition's lips move. In the silence of the room, Ellen hears nothing, but she can see the mouth in the mirror forming her name. Ellen. The voice is not audible with her ears, but somehow she feels it within, a cold whisper that seems to bypass sound. It is the strangest sensation, as if a breeze inside her mind sighed her name. Ellen's blood runs cold. How does this shade know her name? Is it death itself come to claim her? She tries to speak, to ask, "Who are you?" But her throat closes, no sound emerges. The figure's pallid visage shifts closer in the reflection, almost as if about to emerge from the glass entirely. Now Ellen can make out more. The head is wrapped in what looks like a winding cloth or burial shroud. There is a hint of skeletal hollows beneath the translucent skin. Those eyes, endless and sorrowful, hold hers captive. Mary cannot bear another second. With a sudden cry, she snatches the spare candle and the tinderbox, striking a flint, desperately, to spark it alight. In her panic, it takes a few tries, seconds that feel like an eternity, while the presence looms over her sister. Finally, the second candle flares to life. Light floods the little parlor in an orange flash. Ellen and Mary both blink and wheel around. The mirror nearly topples as Ellen jolts up from her chair. There is no one else in the room, only the two sisters, panting, hearts hammering. The cold dissipates almost instantly, as if an unseen door had slammed shut. The ordinary sounds of the house return. A drip from the kitchen sink, the low rumble of the banked fire. The mirror shows nothing now but two frightened young women and the twin glows of candle flames behind them. Mary bursts into sobs, dropping the flint. "What did we do? What was that?" she cries, breaking the vow of silence thoroughly now. Ellen's knees feel weak. She grips the edge of the table. She wants to answer, but her teeth are chattering uncontrollably. The same name echoes in her mind. Not her own name, but a name she thought she glimpsed on that phantom's lips after it spoke hers. Could it have been Mark or Marcus? Was it trying to identify itself, or was it mocking the saint invoked? She is no longer sure of anything except that something unnatural occurred. They huddle together for warmth and comfort. Mary mumbles a prayer under her breath, "Angel of God, protect us," repeating it. The candles burn steadily now, nothing out of the ordinary. But the mirror, neither sister will look into it again tonight. Mary takes the black shawl from her shoulders and gently drapes it over the mirror's face, covering it entirely. Only then do they feel a measure of safety. The oppressive sensation has lifted, but the memory of it remains like a stain on the air. News of the Briggs sisters' fright on St. Mark's Eve spreads in hushed conversations over the following days. The story grows in the telling, as stories do. By the time it reaches the neighboring hamlets, people say the devil himself appeared in their mirror, or that Ellen saw the face of a recently deceased villager calling her name. Ellen, for her part, took ill with a nervous fever not long after that night. Whether from the chill or the fright, no one can say, but for weeks she lay in bed, tossing and murmuring deliriously about those eyes in the glass. Mary and her mother cared for her diligently. She recovered physically by early summer, yet something in her spirit had changed. The bright, laughing girl who yearned to see her future true love had become skittish, grave, reluctant to venture out after dark. It's said that Ellen Briggs never married. She refused all suitors that came calling in subsequent years. Perhaps the apparition's dread visage eclipsed any kind of vision of romance for her. In her later years, she'd shake her head at the village girls' talk of fortune-telling games and warn, "Don't meddle with what you don't understand. I looked for my fate in a mirror once, and something looked back." As for Mary, she spoke little of what she saw, aside from confirming that indeed an apparition had manifested. The local vicar, when he heard the tale, paid a visit. Being a rational man, he suggested it was a trick of the light, combined with the girls' fainting heads from fasting. But under his breath he quoted a snippet of scripture about not suffering a witch or soothsayer to live, a pointed reminder that such vigil-keeping bordered on sinful in the church's eyes. Mary felt sufficiently chastened and never attempted such a rite again. She ended up marrying a local miller and living a quiet, unremarkable life, though she kept a firm rule in her household that all mirrors must be covered at night with a cloth, a habit that perplexed her children. Only once did she explain it. "The night has its own reflections we're not meant to see," she said softly, leaving her youngsters wide-eyed and obedient. The Briggs sisters' experience was not unique in that region. Throughout Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, St. Mark's Eve carried a strong aura of the supernatural. Parish records and folk memory recount other incidents. In one parish letter from the 1820s, a clergyman relates how he found a young woman of his congregation fainted by the churchyard gate just after midnight on April 24th. When revived, she tearfully claimed she'd seen a funeral procession of ghosts winding out of the church, and the last spectre in line was herself, in a wedding gown that turned to a burial shroud as she watched. The vicar chalked it up to imagination, or perhaps a few village boys playing a cruel prank in sheets, but he noted that the woman was troubled in her mind ever after, and indeed died of a sudden illness before the year was out, just as she believed she would. In another story whispered among locals near York, a vicar's own daughter attempted the mirror vigil, unbeknownst to her pious father. This young lady, driven by the same romantic dare, locked herself in the rectory parlour on St. Mark's Eve with a mirror and single candle. What transpired is recorded in her private diary, found years later in the rectory attic. She saw, or believed she saw, an image form in the dark glass, not a man's face as hoped, but a black dog with burning eyes that leapt at her reflection, snarling soundlessly. Shocked and terrified, she fell back screaming, drawing the household's alarm. When they burst in, nothing was amiss, except the mirror had fallen and cracked across, and the poor girl crouched in a corner, sobbing that the devil came in the shape of a hound. Her father reprimanded her severely for the dangerous folly, and led her in prayer to cleanse the home. She survived the fright, but remained deeply penitent, and joined a convent some years later, devoting her life to God to atone for delving where I ought not, as she wrote. Such tales illustrate the psychology of collective ritual and suggestion at play. Imagine the mindset of these young people, raised in a world where faith and folklore intermingled, where on one hand the church said fortune-seeing was evil, and on the other hand their elders passed down the enticing rhymes of love divination, The very act of participating in the ritual, fasting, staying up till midnight, being alone or only with a fellow initiate, primed their minds for extraordinary experiences. The flicker of a candle in a mirror when you're half faint with hunger and brimming with anticipation can easily become a phantom figure in one's perception. A loose window shutter bangs, one's heart leaps, thinking it the approach of something supernatural. The sound of one's own blood in the ears might be mistaken for phantom whispers. And if anything slightly odd does occur, a draught making the flame dance, a trick of the reflection, the eager mind seizes on it, magnifies it, shapes it into the expected sign or omen. It is likely, modern reasoning would assert, that Ellen and Mary Briggs conjured that horrifying image out of a mix of fear, longing, and suggestion. Perhaps the overlay of Mary's face and a shadow in the low light made a composite that resembled a shrouded form, and Ellen's anxious mind filled in the rest. The whisper of her name could have been the wind squeezing through the crack in the window frame, which a frightened imagination turned into a spirit's voice. We know now how powerful the mind's eye can be, especially under ritual conditions. A kind of self-hypnosis can occur. But to the people then, and to the sisters themselves, there was no convincing them it wasn't real. It felt real, and in matters of omen, the feeling is what carries weight. One must note the curious, self-fulfilling nature of these prophecies. The expectation of something dreadful might cause panicked behavior that leads to actual harm. Ellen's subsequent illness and withdrawal from society could be seen as the curse of that night fulfilling itself in a way. She saw death, or believed she did. Thereafter she lived as one awaiting death, fearful and closed off. In a sense, part of her died that night from sheer terror. It's as if the prophecy forced its own truth. Had she not thought she saw a death omen, would her life have gone differently? Would she have married and lived happily? No one can say, for the moment she peered into that mirror, her path altered under the weight of what she perceived. But beyond the psychological, there lingers the possibility, entertained even by the pragmatic elders after a pint or two at the tavern, that something genuinely uncanny walks abroad on St. Mark's Eve. This date, April 24th, lies in that enigmatic interval after the spring equinox, a time laden with older pagan significance. Long before the night became associated with the Christian St. Mark, it may have been an important night in local folk calendars for communing with spirits of the year to come. Lincolnshire folklore, and indeed other parts of England, spoke of how the night marchers of the coming year's dead roamed on this eve. Some said it wasn't only those destined to die, but also those destined to marry could be glimpsed in spectral form. In one village it was claimed you could spread ashes on the hearth, and in the morning of St. Mark's Day see the footprints of any family members who would not be alive by next St. Mark's. A morbid prank, perhaps. One can imagine naughty children sneaking in to imprint boot marks to scare a grouchy uncle or the like. But people believed enough in it to avoid looking, lest they find their own track in the ash. We see here a fascinating double ritual around the same night, one of love, the maid seeking her future groom, and one of death, the vigil for the year's funerals. Love and death, Eros and Thanatos, entwined under the pale starlight of early spring. It is as if the very attempt to know one's romantic fate flirted with mortality as a consequence. The mirror in the parlour and the vigil in the porch were but two sides of the same coin. Both dared to catch a forbidden glimpse of destiny. And sometimes, one suspect, destiny answered in the grimmest way to those it found presumptuous. Mirrors especially have long been seen as portals, devices that can either reflect truth or open into another realm. The superstition of covering mirrors after someone dies, prevalent in many cultures, stems from the fear that the soul, departing, might see itself in the mirror and be trapped, or that something from beyond might slip through into our world, using the mirror as a doorway. On St. Mark's Eve, when by law the world of spirits is closer, a mirror vigil would have been doubly perilous. Who knows what might use that dark glass to peer back at the living? In the case of the Briggs sisters, one might say that instead of a bridegroom's kindly face, some roaming death spirit found them and answered their call. Why it would do so is a mystery. Was it merely drawn by their foolish invitation, or was it seeking to impart a warning? Did it intend to harm, or simply to say, "This is the fate that awaits you eventually. Be warned"? If it was a product of their own minds, then collectively the two conjured a singular vision of dread. If it was not, then St. Mark's Eve holds darker forces than simple fortune-telling, forces that respond when the future is scried, giving not what is desired but what is deserved, or at least what is fated. Interestingly, a local explanation that circulated after the Briggs incident tried to put a more hopeful spin on it. A wise old granny in the village said, "Oh, the poor lasses saw a spirit indeed, but 'tweren't a curse." That was old St. Mark himself appearing to chide them. She suggested the dark figure was the saint, whose feast day was dawning, admonishing the girls for invoking him for something as trivial as husband peeping. After all, St. Mark was traditionally symbolized by a winged lion and known for his solemnity. Maybe he was displeased. So in a way, this granny reinterpreted the omen not as "you will die," but "don't do this again." It was a kind of cultural reframing to ease the family's fear. And indeed, neither Ellen nor Mary ever repeated the experiment. If it was St. Mark giving them a good scare to save their souls from superstition, he succeeded marvelously. Rationalizations and reframings aside, the legend of that mirror's spectre endured. Well into the late 19th century, folklorists collecting tales in Yorkshire would find elderly folks who remembered hearing about the Briggs girl who saw death on St. Mark's Eve. It served as a warning to young people not to dabble in the occult out of youthful fancy. Better to wait for Providence to reveal one's spouse in due course than to summon an answer on a haunted night. Psychologically, one can appreciate how a group ritual, like a cluster of village girls all fasting and longing together, can create a shared anticipation that feeds individual experience. Perhaps if Ellen had done it entirely alone without Mary present, she might have just glimpsed a flicker and dismissed it. But with her sister there, equally primed, their fears and hopes played off each other, amplifying the result. The human mind under expectation is a powerful thing. When two minds with the same expectation share a space, they can reinforce a hallucination into an apparently tangible event. In modern terms, it's almost like a small-scale mass hysteria or a synchronized lucid dream. And yet, even knowing that, if you or I sat in a dark room before a mirror at midnight on St. Mark's Eve, would we not also feel that prickling up the spine, that sense that something might appear? The stories hold sway over us because somewhere deep in our cultural memory, we have absorbed the idea that certain nights and rites can open a door, and once the door opens, you cannot control who or what comes through. As the 19th century wore on, the practice of St. Mark's Eve divination waned. Perhaps it was the spread of education and the repeated discouragement from clergy that finally dampened it. Or perhaps it was the accumulating tales of things going awry that dissuaded the next generations. By the early 20th century, one Lincolnshire folklorist wrote that she could find hardly anyone who still kept the old porch vigils or mirror tricks on St. Mark's Eve. It had become a thing of grandparents' time, but in some remote corners it quietly persisted, and even where it didn't, it found new life in a different calendar slot. Many of these love divinations drifted to Halloween, which became the more popular night for parlor games to see your true love. Indeed, Halloween mirror gazing by candlelight, or peeling an apple in one strip and tossing it over your shoulder to see if the peel forms the initial of your future spouse. These customs survived into modern times. Often they retain that slight edge of spookiness. The mirror could show a skull as easily as a face, if fate so decreed, according to Halloween lore too. Thus, the motif of the fortune that backfires, of asking who you'll wed and getting an omen of death, carried on, shifting with the calendar and fashions, but fundamentally unchanged. It speaks to a deep truth in the collective psyche, that love and death are twin mysteries, and that to invite one kind of vision is to risk brushing against the other. Perhaps it is because marriage was, and in some ways still is, symbolically a death of one life, your life alone, and the birth of another, life with your partner. In older times, many women quite literally risked death in childbirth upon marriage. So the line between a wedding and a funeral was thinner than we might think. Brides wore veils, like shrouds, and were given away, as if dying to their old family. The subconscious might produce a skeleton in bridal garb as a natural reflection of those anxieties. After hearing such accounts, one could imagine a cautious soul remarking, "Perhaps it's better not to know. If the future holds happiness, let it surprise me. If it holds sorrow, let me not suffer it in advance." There is wisdom in that. The story of St. Mark's Eve and the mirror that shows death encapsulates this wisdom in dramatic form. As we leave the quiet Yorkshire village now, stepping away from that shuttered farmhouse where a covered mirror rests and two girls once faced their own fear, the hour grows late. The wind outside has picked up a little, carrying with it the faint sense of spring night, damp earth and budding leaves, but also a lingering trace of churchyard moss. The future remains as silent as the stars overhead. Perhaps the only safe way to meet it is with patience and courage when it comes, rather than trying to drag it into the present. Still, our journey into prophecy's shadow has only begun. From this intimate domestic tale, let us turn to a more public drama, one that unfolded centuries earlier in the heart of France, involving a widow accused of wielding the power to foresee death itself. Her fate, and the fear she sparked in those around her, will show another facet of the price one pays for glimpsing the unwelcome future. Steel your nerves, for we go now to the Loire Valley in the mid-1600s, where in dark prison walls a woman awaited judgment for the crime of divination, and perhaps left behind a curse of her own. The year is 1652. In the shadow of the medieval Château de Saumur, on the banks of the broad, slow-moving Loire River, a drama of fear and superstition is reaching its climax. It is dawn, and a pale sun struggles to break through low-lying mists that curl around the town's gables and spires. The good folk of Saumur are already awake despite the early hour. Many have been awake all night, trembling or praying. Today a woman is to be executed in the town square, a woman they have called La Sorcière, the witch, but whom they once knew as Marguerite Pivert, the widow of a local wheelwright. Marguerite Pivert's story is a tragic one that spread terror throughout the Loire Valley. She was not always feared. Once she was an ordinary townsfolk, a healer of sorts, known to brew herbal remedies for sick children and mutter blessings, or what some might call spells, over the ailing. In those turbulent mid-century years, full of war residue and plague whispers, a healer was tolerated, sometimes quietly respected. Marguerite was a widow in her 50s, with no children of her own. She lived in a snug cottage on the edge of town near the woods. Villagers visited her for potions for their fevers, salves for their cow's infected hoof, or perhaps a charm to encourage a tardy sweetheart to propose. It was said she had the sight in a modest way. She would interpret curious things like the shapes of wax drippings, or the way a rooster crowed at midnight, to offer small predictions. A coming storm, a pregnancy on the way, a warning to avoid traveling on a certain day. In an age steeped in superstition, this was not uncommon among wise women. For years, no one much bothered about Marguerite's little divinations. Saumur, like much of France then, was emerging from the last waves of witch persecutions. The most fevered witch hunts had been earlier in the century. By 1652, trials still occurred, but the frenzy had subsided a bit. So Marguerite might have lived out her days quietly, if not for the incident of the bones. It happened in late autumn of the previous year. The leaves had turned gold and crimson along the Loire, and the chill rains had begun. At the chateau, a noble family resided, the Marquis de Bellois and his wife, who had recently been blessed, finally, after years of trying, with a child, a son and heir to their line. The birth of little Seigneur Edouard was celebrated widely, but as the weeks passed, whispers spread that something was amiss with the infant. He would not feed well, he cried through the night. His face looked oddly wan. The local physician tried the usual remedies for infant ailments to no avail. The Marquis's wife, desperate and terrified of losing her precious baby, was said to have sought help wherever she could, including quietly from folk healers. One of her ladies-in-waiting, who had connections in town, arranged for Marguerite Pivert to come in secret to the chateau one evening. This was highly irregular, a noble family resorting to a peasant woman's magic, but parental desperation knows no class. Marguerite, as the record hints, examined the baby and gave the anxious mother a poultice and herbal draught. But it was what Marguerite did next that sealed her fate. Perhaps emboldened by sympathy or by an earnest desire to display her skill, Marguerite offered to perform a divination to discern the child's future health. According to later testimony, she took from her pouch a small leather bag, containing an assortment of animal bones, likely chicken bones and knuckle bones from a sheep, carved with strange symbols. This was an old practice she had learned from who knows where. Some said her grandmother was a Romani traveller, others that she gleaned it from a book of spells. Before the fireplace in the great hall, under flickering torches, Marguerite cast the bones onto a spread cloth, much like someone casting dice for a game. The Marquise and her lady hovered over them, watching these yellowed bits clatter and settle. Marguerite studied the pattern intently. Those close enough swore her eyes took on a distant, trance-like look, as if she were reading lines on the bones, invisible to anyone else. A hush fell, and then Marguerite Pivert let out a low, mournful sigh. She turned to the Marquise, who by now was wringing her hands, and spoke bluntly, "Madame, I must tell you true. The bones say the child will not live to see the winter's end." The words dropped like a stone in a pond, sending ripples of horror through all present. The Marquise reportedly fainted on the spot. Her lady shrieked at Marguerite to stop speaking, and within minutes the household erupted in chaos. Servants ushered the witch out, half in fear, half in fury. How dare she pronounce doom on the Marquis's heir? Some muttered she must be an evil witch indeed, to prophesy death, perhaps cause it with that curse-like pronouncement. The Marquis himself, returning to find his wife in hysterics and the baby wailing more than ever, was enraged. He sent soldiers to fetch Marguerite at once, but in the confusion of the night she had slipped away back to her cottage. Over the next weeks, the infant's condition worsened despite all efforts. He wasted away, the classic signs of what people in those days called a wasting sickness, perhaps something like infant consumption or failure to thrive. In their grief, the noble couple did what many would. They looked for someone to blame. Who better than the woman who not only failed to heal, but dared to predict the child's death? Sure enough, little Edouard died in January, before the last snows melted, just as Marguerite foretold. The Marquis, devastated and furious, turned his grief to vengeance. He petitioned the authorities, both secular and ecclesiastical, to arrest Marguerite Pivert on charges of witchcraft and murder. In his view, she must have caused the death by malevolent magic. Her prediction was proof that she had a hand in it, since how else could she have known? This reasoning, however flawed to our modern understanding, was compelling in an era when many still believed witches could blight crops, sicken livestock, and indeed kill children with a curse, or by crafting a clay effigy and breaking it. The bones she cast were seen not as a diagnostic tool, but as infernal instruments. So Marguerite was arrested on a cold February dawn. They came for her at her cottage, local constables and a church official. Villagers watched from behind shutters and half-open doors as the once helpful healer was dragged through the streets in chains. Some were shocked, others were unsurprised. "I always knew something wasn't right with that one. She knew too much," a fishmonger's wife muttered while crossing herself. People fear those who claim to see what's hidden, and now that fear came out as spiteful gossip, every small misfortune in recent memory was suddenly attributed to Marguerite. Did a farmer's cow miscarry last spring? Ah, yes, and hadn't he refused to pay Marguerite extra for a charm? See, she bewitched the cow. Did the baker's daughter fall ill after accepting a love potion from Marguerite? Perhaps the potion was a poison, and so on. The atmosphere in Saumur turned febrile with suspicion. The trial that followed combined civil and religious proceedings, typical of witchcraft cases post the heyday of the Inquisition. We have fragments of the transcripts preserved in local archives. They tell of a frightened, defiant Marguerite facing a panel of stern magistrates and a Dominican priest sent from Tours to oversee the interrogation. By accounts, she steadfastly denied consorting with the devil or intending any harm. "I only read what the bones revealed," she insisted, "as God in heaven allowed me to know. I have no power beyond what nature shows." This was a clever defense in a way. She was trying to frame herself not as a witch invoking demons, but as a sort of natural seer, akin to someone who reads the weather from cloud patterns. But the authorities pressed her. How exactly did she read the bones? Was there an incantation? Who taught her this art? Under pressure and likely torture, as was customary, one document mentions she was put to the question, meaning subjected to painful interrogation. Marguerite divulged bits of information. She said her mother had taught her some fortune casting with small sheep bones, a practice supposedly passed down from old Gaulish times. This mention of pagan antiquity did not help her case in the eyes of churchmen. The most damning admission, however, was that she had indeed foreseen the child's death. In the logic of the time, to accurately predict a death was tantamount to either having an unholy alliance with demonic forces feeding her knowledge, or actually causing the death by cursing. When asked if she invoked any spirits when casting the bones, the transcripts record that she said, "I prayed only that whatever be revealed truly." The prosecutor pounced on the word whatever, implying she willingly opened herself to any spirit. That whatever was Satan, the priest exclaimed in the courtroom. She invited the devil to whisper in her ear. We must remember Europe in 1652 was still a deeply religious and fearful society, though slightly more rational than the century before. In another 50 years, such a case might have been dismissed as superstition. But Marguerite's misfortune was timing, and the high profile of her victim. The death of a noble's child had to have a scapegoat, and so the verdict was all but predetermined. After a brief trial, she was found guilty of witchcraft and homicide by sorcery. The sentence, execution by strangling and burning, a common method in France where the condemned would be garroted, a rope tightened around the neck first, then their body burned at the stake. The burning served both as supposed purification and as a stark warning to others. At dawn in 1652, Marguerite Pivert stands upon the scaffold in the square of Saumur. Behind her rises a rough wooden stake, and at its base the bundles of wood lie damp with morning dew. The crowd gathers at a cautious distance, not too near, as if evil might be catching, but not so far as to miss the spectacle. Faces are tense, some grimly satisfied, others a bit regretful. A few of the villagers actually pity her. They knew her kindness once. But fear overrides pity, fear that if she were truly a witch, any sympathy could draw her curse. Marguerite herself, witnesses say, looked strangely calm, pale and bruised from prison, yes, but she held her head high. As the executioner prepared the noose for the strangling, she supposedly uttered a curse. Accounts vary on her exact words, some likely embellished in retelling, but one common version claims she looked directly at the Marquis and his wife, who watched from a balcony, and proclaimed, "You accuse me of speaking death. Very well, death shall speak to you all. By the bones I cast and the fire I die in, I lay this curse. Those who sought my blood unjustly will find at their door the tokens of their own fate." Chilling words. The officials tried to hush her, but she had said her piece. A ripple of unease spread through the onlookers. Many immediately crossed themselves or murmured prayers against evil. The Marquis was heard to scoff, ravings of a condemned hag, but the way he blanched and stepped back betrayed his own dread. The execution proceeded. The garrote was tightened until Marguerite went limp, then the pyre lit. Flames leapt and danced, and dark smoke curled toward the morning sky. Some swore they saw the shape of a great black bird rising in that smoke, winging its way across the rooftops, an omen perhaps, or just a fanciful invention of later storytellers. In any case, Marguerite Pivert, the bone caster of Saumur, was gone. One might think that would end the matter. Usually after a witch is executed, a community, though shaken, feels a certain relief. The source of evil is purged, life can return to normal. And indeed, in the immediate weeks after, people tried to go back to their routines. Winter gave way to spring, apple trees bloomed along the Loire, fishermen cast their nets, and merchants hawked their wine and salt at market. But the shadow Marguerite left did not dissipate so easily. It began with a discovery one morning at the Marquis's own doorstep, a small pile of bones neatly arranged. The servant who found them recoiled in terror, recognizing them as the same type of knuckle bones and tiny vertebrae the witch had used for divination. Rumors flew that each bone was charred black on one side, burned as if snatched from Marguerite's own pyre. The Marquis angrily ordered them thrown in the river and forbade his household from speaking of it, lest it lend credence to the witch's parting words. But soon others in town reported similar eerie gifts. The local magistrate, who had been outspoken in demanding Marguerite's death, woke to find a single bone, an animal's rib by the looks of it, placed on his threshold. The tip of it was also blackened. He nearly tripped on it leaving for early mass, and when he recognized what it was, he visibly blanched. That day he was struck with a severe chill and fever that lingered for weeks. fueling murmurs that the curse had marked him. The priest from Tours who had overseen the trial had left town immediately after the execution, unsettled. On the road back, his carriage horse went lame outside a village. While it was being re-shod, he lodged a night at an inn. There, the innkeeper later recounted, the priest discovered an unpleasant surprise among his baggage. A cluster of small bones tied together with a red string, hidden under some clothes. The priest, panic-stricken, burned them in the inn's hearth and spent the rest of the night in fervent prayer. Yet within the year, that priest fell ill and died mysteriously, despite being in his middle years and otherwise healthy. Those who heard the story couldn't help but think of Marguerite's death tokens. Perhaps these are coincidences layered with superstition. In a less charged context, one might find logical explanations. Someone sympathetic to Marguerite, or just mischievous, could have placed bones around to stoke fear or carry out a twisted sense of revenge. There were a few who quietly objected to how she was made a scapegoat. A couple of village youths with a grudge against the magistrate might have played a trick. Copycat pranks can happen when a powerful idea is in the air. The charred bones might have come from the remains of the pyre itself, stolen by someone, maybe a secret friend or a relative of Marguerite. Did she have a niece or nephew eager to spook the persecutors? If so, the intention might have been simply to frighten those responsible, a last laugh of sorts. However, as the months went on, fear blossomed into full-blown paranoia among Saumur's people. Every unexplained event or misfortune was now tied to the witch's curse. A string of stillborn lambs in April? The farmers whispered that Marguerite's malediction lay on the livestock. A house fire broke out in June, gutting a stable. Clearly the witch's doing, they said, even though it was likely an overturned lantern by a careless groom. Fear can amplify and distort reality, and here it surely did. People started leaving small offerings at crossroads, bread, salt, or iron nails, traditional wards against dark magic, hoping to appease Marguerite's roaming spirit. It was as if in killing her body, they had unleashed something even more potent. The idea of her vengeance, which wormed into their minds and dwelt there. A particularly poignant anecdote circulated. One of Marguerite's former clients, a young mother named Lucette, claimed that a week after the execution, she heard a rattling at her window at midnight. When she peered out, she saw a single bone hanging by a thread from the window latch, tapping against the pane in the breeze. Terrified, Lucette took it as a message. Years before, Marguerite had predicted the safe birth of Lucette's first child. Correctly, as it turned out. Now, with another baby on the way, Lucette feared this omen meant the opposite for her unborn. She became convinced her child was marked by the curse. Tragically, whether by stress or simply fate, Lucette's baby was born premature and died within days. The grieving mother firmly believed the witch's posthumous curse had claimed her child, since she had once consorted with the witch for fortune-telling. When stories like Lucette's spread, they grow in the telling. Soon, some were saying all infants in town were at risk unless baptized immediately and protected with special charms. Sales of amulets, like little sachets of holy herbs or medallions of St. Benedict, went up briskly, ironically a kind of folk magic to counter the perceived folk curse. It was a time of collective anxiety where rational voices were few. The local parish priest tried to quell panic by preaching that God's power is greater than any witch's curse. Fear not, only pray. But even he, as noted, had originally believed Marguerite a tool of Satan, so his assurances rang somewhat hollow. Interestingly, while the commoners trembled, the more educated or elite of Saumur tried to publicly dismiss the whole cursed notion. The Marquis, after the bone incident at his door, maintained a facade of contempt for the superstition. He hosted a lavish banquet in spring and toasted to the prosperity of our town now rid of an impostor. But attendees noticed his hands shook a little as he raised the glass, and his eyes kept flicking to the doorway, as if half expecting a phantom to appear. It is one thing to claim disbelief, another to purge the images from one's own mind. Even a noble who scorns peasant fears can wake sweating in the midnight hour from a dream of a charred bone pointing at his heart. The French witch persecutions historically saw such lingering hauntings of reputation. When a person was executed as a witch, often the community still talked of them years later, whenever something odd occurred. Ah, that must be the witch's revenge, they'd say. It was a coping mechanism, a way to externalize misfortune. By giving a name, however terrifying, to their troubles, they made sense of senseless events, Of course, it also kept the cycle of fear alive. In Saumur's case, the legend of Marguerite Pivert became a fixture in local lore for generations. A century later, antiquarians visiting the town wrote of the tale of the soothsayer widow who cursed the village, still being told by grandmothers on winter nights. From a reflective standpoint, the story of Marguerite, the Witch of Saumur as she became mythologized, illustrates how prophecy and fear entangle destructively. Marguerite did what might be considered a compassionate, or at least neutral act, using her alleged gift to warn of an impending tragedy, the infant's death. Yet instead of thanks, she earned blame. People don't like bearers of bad news. It's an ancient habit to mistreat the messenger. Perhaps if Marguerite had lied, given the Marquis's false hope, she'd not have faced such wrath. But then, she was professional enough or fatalistic enough to read the bones plainly. In a way, Marguerite became the embodiment of that Greek concept of the Cassandra curse, telling the truth and suffering for it. However, Marguerite's own curse at the stake, whether real or attributed, turned her from passive victim to active avenger in the eyes of the townsfolk. It gave a narrative where she wasn't just unjustly killed, she fought back from beyond. That perhaps served a psychological function. It externalized guilt. Those who secretly felt bad about condemning a woman whose only crime was predicting something unfortunate could sublimate that guilt into she truly was evil. Look, she cursed us. It's easier to live with a terrible thing done if you convince yourself the victim deserved it. A horrifying notion indeed, that they needed her to be a witch to justify their actions, and so collectively they dreamed up the continuing curse. The human mind will contort reality to protect itself from remorse. It's worth noting too the self-fulfilling aspect of Marguerite's alleged dying curse. She said, "Those who sought my blood unjustly will find at their door the tokens of their own fate." After that, any misfortune could be seen as such a token. The bones delivered might have been simply random bones, or not even present at all. One wonders how many tales were pure imagination of frightened people. A clatter in the night they assumed was bones, a dog bringing an old soup bone and leaving it on a stoop misinterpreted as witchcraft, even dreams of bones that felt real. The mind under extreme fear can play astonishing tricks. Hallucinations aren't out of the question when belief is strong. Then again, from the perspective of a folk tale or a believer, one might say Marguerite's prophecy power was real, and so was her curse. If she could foretell death with bones, maybe she could also, in dying, bind her spirit to those bones to enact vengeance. It's a dark, romantic notion, the wronged wise woman who becomes a wrathful spectre. In later retellings by villagers, she indeed took on a near-demon persona. Mothers warned unruly children, "Be good, or La Pivert will come for you with her bag of bones." She became a boogeyman figure, ironically the very thing she was not in life. The Witch of Saumur's saga ultimately underscores the peril inherent in prophecy. Not only did knowing the future, in this case the baby's fate, not help avert it, but the knowledge itself destroyed both the prophet and sowed greater misery. It is as if fate, jealous of its secrets, exacted a heavy toll on all involved. Those who glimpsed the design, Marguerite, died. Those who heard it, the Marquise and others, lived in fear and heartbreak. No one was better off for that foreknowledge. Perhaps had she said nothing, the baby would die anyway, but Marguerite wouldn't have. Perhaps the Marquise's grief would have been accepted as God's will, rather than transmuted into vengeful fury. The moment prophecy entered the equation, a terrible chain reaction started, leading to execution, curses, and abiding fear. So was the price of that prophecy worth paying? Most sober observers would say no. A wise proverb from that region emerged in the aftermath. Better not know what the bones say than know and be cursed for it. Indeed, as the sun climbs higher above Saumur on that morning in 1652, scattering the mist, the crowd disperses from the smouldering stake. People rush home to bolt their doors and sprinkle holy water on their thresholds, just in case. The Marquis retreats to his chateau to brood, the blackened bones of his son interred in the family crypt below. Life continues, but the pall of foreknowledge, both Marguerite's and her ominous final foretelling, lies over the town like a shroud. It will slowly lift over months and years, but never entirely. Some stains never quite wash out. They linger in collective memory like a shadow at the corner of one's vision. From this grim tale of divination and death, we move onward in time and place to another group of seekers of hidden knowledge. But now, the scene shifts to the scholarly parlours and gaslit rooms of Victorian Britain, a world of educated men and women who approached the supernatural with curiosity and experimentation. In the next part of our journey, we shall see how even those armed with science and skepticism could find themselves bitten by the reflections they conjured when they peered too eagerly into the beyond through a crystal mirror. Steel yourself again, for the foggy streets of Edinburgh await, and in an attic flat, two learned gentlemen are about to discover that some mirrors show more than you bargain for. Edinburgh, Scotland. The year is 1893. It is a winter's night in the new town, and a thick fog has rolled in from the Firth of Forth, blurring the gaslit street lamps into pale halos. The grand Georgian facades of Heriot Row loom in sepia shadows. Up on the second floor of a particular townhouse, a pair of gentlemen convene in a dimly lit study. The hour is near midnight, the fire in the grate has died to a low glow, and the room's corners bristle with darkness. On a mahogany table between them lies an object of singular allure, a polished black mirror, oval in shape, framed in tarnished silver, about the size of a handspan. It is a scrying glass, an obsidian mirror said to be fashioned in the style of the legendary Dr. Dee's Devil's Mirror from centuries ago. The two men are not superstitious villagers or cunning men of old. They are modern intellectuals, members of the Society for Psychical Research, that august organization founded by scientists and philosophers to investigate paranormal phenomena with empirical rigor. Let us introduce them. The older man with mutton chop whiskers and a tweed suit is Dr. Alistair Gilchrist, a professor of philosophy at the university and a keen student of mysticism. The younger, clean-shaven and bespectacled is Henry MacAndrew, an engineer by training and an amateur hypnotist. Both share a fascination with the occult, but approach it as one might approach a laboratory experiment, carefully, methodically, skeptically hopeful. They have been reading papers on crystal vision, that is, the induction of visions by staring into reflective or transparent surfaces, a practice which has gained some attention in psychical circles as of late. The famed Society for Psychical Research, SPR, in London, has even formed a committee on scrying, collecting anecdotes of people who, by gazing into mirrors or crystals, see apparitions or symbolic scenes. Many dismiss such things as self-delusion or hallucination. But Gilchrist and MacAndrew wonder, might there truly be a window in the mind that a mirror can open? Could one, perhaps, glimpse not only hidden corners of the psyche, but possibly external spiritual realities, or even the future by this means? Thus, on this misty night, they have embarked on an experiment. The conditions are set, only one low lamp burning behind them, so as not to reflect directly in the mirror and cause glare. The mirror itself lies flat on the table, angled slightly. A candle has been melted and its wax dripped around the frame, forming a makeshift seal as if to sanctify or contain whatever might emerge. On a sideboard rest a clutter of notebooks, a pocket watch, and one or two scientific instruments, a barometer, a thermometer, as if they might measure some physical change when the scrying begins. These men want to be thorough. Gilchrist checks his watch. It is 11:55 p.m. Almost time. They have decided midnight might be a fruitful hour, aligning with folklore for maximum effect. MacAndrew is seated with hands resting lightly on either side of the mirror, not touching it, but as if ready to grab or steady it if needed. He has prepared himself with some deep breathing and a short self-hypnosis to increase receptivity. Gilchrist stands behind him, notebook in hand, ready to observe and record anything said or done. They have agreed MacAndrew will do the gazing first while Gilchrist observes. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling a branch against the windowpane. Neither man flinches, but they do note the eerie ambience. These Edinburgh streets have seen many a ghost story, many a secret in the fog, but inside this room it's the hush of inquiry that prevails. At the stroke of midnight from the nearby St. Stephen's Church clock, MacAndrew begins to stare fixedly into the black mirror. Gilchrist writes a note. 12 o'clock. Subject begins crystal gazing. Initial demeanor, calm, focused. Room quiet. The only sounds now are the faint hiss of the gas lamp and the breathing of the two men. For long minutes, nothing happens. MacAndrew simply gazes, his eyes growing a bit glassy. Gilchrist watches the mirror over his colleague's shoulder, seeing nothing but darkness in it. His own face, blurred, hovers on the periphery of the reflection, but he positions himself such that MacAndrew's head blocks direct reflection of anything except gloom. This, he thinks, should minimize pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see shapes in randomness. MacAndrew begins to whisper, as they had planned, describing any inner impressions. I see only blackness. Like looking into a deep well, Gilchrist nods, scribbling. 5 more minutes pass, the gas lamp sputters slightly, and Gilchrist adjusts it lower to keep the room dim. MacAndrew's breathing has slowed, he is in a mild trance. Then he says haltingly, there is a mist, a grey mist swirling. Gilchrist leans in, peering at the mirror. He sees nothing but maybe the faint cloudy sheen of MacAndrew's breath on it. But MacAndrew's tone suggests he's not just describing the literal. It's inside the mirror, swirling like fog on the moors. He falls silent again. Gilchrist represses the urge to question him. Better not to interrupt the flow of vision. The professor's heart quickens a beat. Could this be the first sign of a genuine scrying vision, or just MacAndrew's imagination responding to the weather outside? MacAndrew suddenly stiffens. There's something, a shape. Oh, he exhales sharply. Gilchrist nearly drops his pencil in surprise. He sees MacAndrew's face in profile and the reflection of that face in the mirror. For a split second, he thinks he glimpses another shape flicker across the mirror's surface, but it might just be the lamp's reflection, warping as he moved. What do you see? He asked quietly. MacAndrew's voice is strained, almost childlike. A face? I see a face forming in the mist. Gilchrist feels a chill creep up his spine. He can't see it, but MacAndrew sounds utterly convinced. Is it someone you know? Gilchrist prompts gently, poised to note every word. No, not known to me. An old man, perhaps, pale, eyes closed. MacAndrew's own eyes are half-lidded, staring. The candle wax around the mirror has cracked slightly from the warmth in the room, making a faint tick sound. The air feels heavier somehow. Gilchrist checks the room's stillness, all normal, yet he can't escape a prickling sensation on his neck, as if unseen eyes watch them. He shakes it off, focusing. What is the old man doing? He asks quietly. MacAndrew's lips tremble. He's lying down. It looks like he's on a narrow bed. Yes, a cot. Wait. His breath catches. His eyes just opened. Gilchrist flinches, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone to be there. Nothing. The gaslight flickers softly. MacAndrew's voice drops to a strained whisper. He's staring at me. His eyes are full of sadness. Deep, unbearable sadness. He swallows hard. His mouth moves as if he's trying to speak, but there's no sound. Gilchrist writes furiously. Subject reports elderly male face, expression sad, silent. He cannot help now but ask, do you recognize the surroundings? Where is he? MacAndrew furrows his brow, still transfixed. I see. It's like he's in a narrow bed. A cot, candles around, perhaps a deathbed. Wait. He leans closer to the mirror. His nose nearly touches it. I think he's dying. Gilchrist's breath catches. This is not what he expected. Usually reports of scrying involve symbolic images or random scenes, but this sounds like a specific person's final moment. Could MacAndrew be spontaneously connecting with some distant dying man? Or is this some enactment of MacAndrew's subconscious fears? MacAndrew's voice drops to a whisper. He's raising a hand, a thin hand, beckoning. Suddenly, MacAndrew's own right hand lifts slightly in real life, unconsciously mirroring the action. Gilchrist notes this mimicry with both fascination and concern. Outside, the wind gusts, causing an old shutter to bang somewhere. In the mirror, to Gilchrist's eyes, nothing but darkness and the faint outline of MacAndrew's face. But the younger man begins to perspire. A single drop of sweat rolls down his temple. The candles by him, they just went out, he mutters, all but one. Gilchrist wonders if Henry is constructing a narrative unconsciously. Did reading ghost stories or attending Victorian seances predispose him to a melodramatic deathbed vision? Possibly. Yet, the professor cannot deny the hairs on his arms are stiff. The atmosphere in the room feels charged. Suddenly, MacAndrew's face contorts in fear. He sees something. He's pointing. And indeed, the man's outstretched hand in the vision seems to be pointing outward, as if at MacAndrew or beyond him. What is it? Gilchrist asks urgently. MacAndrew nearly whimpers. There's someone behind me in the mirror. At these words, Gilchrist's blood runs cold. He reflexively glances over MacAndrew's shoulder into the mirror. For a fleeting moment, he imagines he does see a third shape, something in the background of the mirror's vision behind the dying man. But it is gone in a blink, if it was ever there. Could be MacAndrew's reflection distorted, or an optical illusion. MacAndrew starts breathing rapidly. His trance is breaking into panic. He's pointing behind me, he repeats. Something is behind me. Gilchrist has to steady him. He places a firm hand on MacAndrew's shoulder. Henry, you're safe. There is nothing behind you. He glances again over his own shoulder to be sure. Only the dark curtains and a shelf of books. He squeezes his friend's shoulder. What do you see now? MacAndrew blinks, seeming to wrest back a bit of rationality, but then his eyes widen at the mirror anew. That other figure, it's like a... Oh dear God. He starts shaking. A black shape, no features, just darkness in the form of... Abruptly he jerks back from the table, nearly knocking the mirror off. Gilchrist catches the mirror just in time, burning his fingertips slightly on hot wax. No more! MacAndrew cries out, covering his eyes with one hand. I'm done! I'm done! All right, Gilchrist soothes. We'll stop. His heart is pounding too. He draws the lamp up, increasing the light in the room to dispel the gloom. The sudden brightness feels both relieving and startling. MacAndrew looks pale as chalk. He gulps some breath. On the table, the black mirror now looks innocuous and flat, reflecting the lamplight. Nothing unusual at all. Gilchrist notes the time. It's only been 15 minutes since midnight. Those 15 minutes felt much longer. As MacAndrew gathers himself, he haltingly recounts the final moments. I saw that old man in his bed. Then behind him I sensed a presence, a dark cloaked figure perhaps. He pointed as if to say, it's here. Then I saw that darkness rush forward, and I felt a terror as if it were rushing at me. That's when I came out of it. He manages a weak chuckle. How foolish I was. Must have gotten carried away. Gilchrist is equal parts relieved that nothing truly catastrophic occurred and disappointed that it devolved into fear so soon, cutting the session short. He cannot discount, however, that MacAndrew did seem to genuinely experience something. They both decide to take a short break, sip some brandy, and discuss. Perhaps they might try again, with Gilchrist as the scryer this time, or perhaps on another night. MacAndrew is hesitant. The experience unsettled him more than he expected. He feels a lingering dread he can't quite articulate, a conviction that what he saw wasn't just in his mind. Unbeknownst to both men, this was the beginning of a chain of events that later newspapers would dub the death omen of the crystal gazers. For that face MacAndrew saw, an old man on his deathbed, would soon find a real-world counterpart, and the dark shape that lunged would not be content to remain a mere vision. 3 nights later, Dr. Alistair Gilchrist hurries down Princes Street through a drizzling rain. The newsboys are calling out something about a tragedy, but Gilchrist is preoccupied. He's on his way to visit Henry MacAndrew, who is taken ill. The morning after their experiment, Henry had been pale and jittery. By that afternoon, he complained of headache and fatigue. Now he's bedridden with what seems a severe nervous exhaustion or a viral fever. It's unclear. Gilchrist, feeling responsible, has been checking on him daily. When Gilchrist arrives at the MacAndrew residence, the housekeeper greets him with a worried face. He's worse today, sir. Raving in his sleep at times, Gilchrist goes up to the dim bedroom. Henry lies there, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. To the professor's alarm, Henry's appearance reminds him eerily of the old man's deathbed he heard described. Pale, ashen, almost aged overnight. On the nightstand, ironically, stands that cursed black mirror. Henry had insisted on keeping it near, oddly enough, as if to master his fear. Gilchrist gently wakes him. Henry's eyes flutter open. He looks at his friend, and for a moment a spark of recognition. Then his gaze slides past Gilchrist's shoulder, and he starts, just like he did during the scrying. What is it? Who's there? Henry tries to sit up, trembling, pointing at the empty corner of the room. Henry, it's me, Alistair. There's no one there, Gilchrist says, casting a glance where Henry pointed. Just a coat stand in the shadows. Henry grips Gilchrist's arm with surprising strength. In a cracked whisper he says, It's here. The shape. I saw it, Alistair. In the corner watching me, the professor feels a chill. No, Henry, your mind is playing tricks from fever. Henry's eyes drift to the mirror on the nightstand. The mirror, he croaks. We should never have touched it. Then he closes his eyes tight, sweat beading on his forehead. Gilchrist pats his hand. Rest now, old chap. I'm here. But Henry seems to fall into a fitful unconsciousness, not quite rest. That night, Henry MacAndrew dies. The doctor later ascribes it to a sudden brain hemorrhage, possibly unrelated to the prior malaise. But Gilchrist is shattered. Over the next day, he goes through the motions, contacting Henry's relatives, informing the SPR colleagues that one of their own has passed under strange circumstances. The local newspaper gets wind that a young and apparently healthy man expired unexpectedly, and by the weekend there are sensational whispers that it was due to experimenting with the occult. Where could that notion come from? Perhaps from the nervous housekeeper who heard Henry's delirious babblings about shapes and mirrors. Then another blow falls. As the formalities unfold, Gilchrist learns of a discovery that ties everything together in a way that makes his rational mind reel. On the evening of their mirror experiment, the same night Henry saw the old man's death vision, an old man had indeed died in Edinburgh under odd circumstances. In a poorhouse infirmary not far from Gilchrist's own neighbourhood, an elderly pensioner passed away shortly after midnight, apparently in the throes of great fear. Nurses reported he was murmuring about a visitor in the corner and trying to point just before he went limp. One nurse also claimed the old man suddenly looked relieved and said, "It's gone now," before expiring. This story appears in a small blurb in the Scotsman newspaper, which Gilchrist reads with mounting alarm. The paper also noted the uncanny coincidence that at the exact same time, a younger man, Henry, across town, was also seized by a fearful delirium, leading to his death a few days later. The article wryly comments on the curious correspondence and leaves it at that. But the SPR circles and later folklorists would not leave it. Soon the tale took shape. Two crystal gazers in Edinburgh attempt to see beyond the veil. They contact unwittingly a dying man's spirit or share his final vision, and by doing so invite the very spectre of death into their own lives. Henry became in legend the man who saw death coming in a mirror. And indeed, a version of his last words got out. On his deathbed, he supposedly said, "It followed me out of the mirror." This may be embellishment, but given what Gilchrist heard from him about seeing the shape in the corner, it's not far off. Gilchrist, grief-stricken and guilt-ridden, gave up his experiments and even resigned from active SPR investigations for a time. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had pried where they shouldn't. In a letter to a colleague months later, he wrote, "I cannot banish the thought that we opened a door that night. Whether into our own subconscious or some external limbo, matters not, for out of it came a shadow that fixed its gaze on dear Henry. I keep recalling how he shuddered at something behind him during the scrying. If only I had had the presence of mind to end it right then, maybe he would be alive." The colleague responded kindly, suggesting it was all an unfortunate series of coincidences inflated by imagination. Many on the SPR leaned to that view publicly, but privately some admitted this affair spooked them off further mirror-gazing research. Edinburgh's foggy streets would retell the story in more chilling fashion. Some claimed that the Black Mirror itself was to blame, that it had been previously owned by a notorious necromancer, tying it fancifully to John Dee's artifact in the British Museum, and thus carried a curse. After Henry's death, Gilchrist indeed took that mirror and donated it anonymously to a museum unwilling to keep it. It sat in storage for decades, and interestingly, museum staff later whispered about unease and one guard's dog refusing to go near the cabinet where it was kept. But such anecdotes are hard to verify. Others pinned the blame not on the mirror, but on the method. Scrying, after all, has long held a fearsome reputation in folklore. The Bloody Mary game known to children, chanting before a mirror to summon a spectre, likely has roots in earlier divination. Young women trying to see their future husband's face, similar to St. Mark's Eve practices. In those tales, often a frightening witch or ghost appears instead. The story of Gilchrist and MacAndrew became like a grown-up Bloody Mary caution. If you stare too long into the dark mirror, you might see death itself staring back, and once you've seen it, it sees you, marking you. Was Henry's death truly caused by some supernatural entity from the mirror? Skeptics say no. He might have had an undiagnosed aneurysm, his fear and delirium just the brain misfiring. The old man's coincident death could be just that, coincidence drawn into a narrative by our pattern-loving minds. But the believers, and to be honest, many average people are inclined to belief when stories are this eerie, they nod wisely and say it's a warning. The two learned men wanted proof of spirits. Well, they got more proof than they bargained for, one might say over ale in a pub. A mirror is a doorway. You shouldn't fling it open unless you're prepared for the consequences. This interplay of Victorian obsession and fear with the paranormal is a hallmark of the era. Here were people armed with science, trying to dissect the spiritual. But sometimes, like a lab experiment that explodes unexpectedly, their probing seemed to backfire. The very quest for objective evidence collided with the subjective nature of fear and possibly genuine unknown forces. Perhaps the mirror experiment did do something inexplicable, facilitate a kind of psychic link between Henry and that old dying man, a shared death vision orchestrated by something beyond mortal ken. If so, then one might consider that shape Henry saw not as a demon or ghost per se, but what if, in the language of myth, it was death itself, making its rounds, collecting souls, accidentally seen by an intruder, Henry, and then having to collect him too since he'd peeked behind the curtain? It's a very fanciful interpretation, but an oddly poetic one that the Victorian imagination could entertain. Indeed, some spiritualist-minded folks later claimed Henry didn't die in vain. Rather, he achieved what the SPR sought, proof of life beyond. The proof being he apparently met the Reaper, and it took him. A grim proof indeed, not useful for scientific publication, but a story that sends a shiver down anyone's spine who hears it. After this incident, the practice of amateur mirror scrying took on a darker tone. Fewer reports were submitted openly to journals for a while, likely because experimenters felt a pang of superstitious fear, even if their conscious minds scoffed. One SPR member in a letter mentioned the Edinburgh mirror case as something that made most of them quietly drop crystal-gazing inquiries. They pivoted to safer-seeming phenomena, like table-tipping or mental telepathy, leaving the dark mirrors for either the foolhardy or the deeply credulous. We, as late-night contemplators, might distill from this the core lesson. Whether or not spectres are real, the act of seeking them can unleash real effects, at least psychologically. The mirror served as a kind of psychological trigger that tapped into MacAndrew's deepest anxieties, and potentially, if one believes it, into a collective reservoir of human experiences, like tapping into the actual dying man's experience. Once tapped, the result cascaded beyond his control. The experiment became the haunting. It's often said that Victorian ghost stories were as much about internal demons as external ones. This true or truish account embodies that. A rational man haunted and ultimately felled by what he sought in the looking glass. It's reminiscent of the Greek Narcissus who wasted away gazing at his reflection, or of other cautionary tales where reflection is equated with confronting one's mortality. In more modern pop culture terms, one could draw a parallel to films where a character gets a premonition of their own death, and then it inevitably follows. Henry seeing that shape behind him, was that effectively a premonition of his doom? If one could ask him, would he have rather not known? Possibly yes. Ignorance would have been bliss. Maybe he'd still be alive if he hadn't opened that psychic door. What of Dr. Gilchrist? He lived on for some years, but some notes suggest he was never quite the same. Once a jovial skeptic, he became a quieter, more cautious man, avoiding talk of ghosts. One anecdote from a friend recounts that Gilchrist refused to have any mirrors in his bedroom after that, and would flinch at his own reflection in windows at night, as if fearful something might co-opt it. A touch of lasting trauma, it seems. Thus, the story of the death omen of the crystal gazers passed into Edinburgh lore. In smoky gentlemen's clubs, one might hear it recounted as a warning not to dabble too far. It served also to add to the mystique of reflective surfaces in ghostly tradition. People already had a habit of covering mirrors in a house where someone had died, to prevent the soul from being trapped or a spirit from appearing. After cases like Henry's, some might justify that tradition further. Who knows what looks out from a mirror in the dark hours? Best not to stare too deeply. In the British Museum to this day rests an obsidian mirror once owned by the Elizabethan magician John Dee. Tour guides note how many claim to feel uneasy near it, and legends swirl that it is cursed or still holds echoes of Dee's conjurations. This mirror from the SPR story ended up not as famous, but among ghost enthusiasts, the tale attached to it makes it a minor occult artifact. A fringe rumor insists the mirror vanished from the museum during the chaos of World War II bombings and later turned up in an antique shop in New Orleans, of all places, linking it to voodoo practitioners. That's likely pure fancy, but it shows how ghost stories travel and mutate. Returning to a reflective mood, no pun intended, we glean from this narrative that sometimes in trying to demystify the darkness, one may fall victim to it. The Victorians, enthralled by psychical research, learned this repeatedly. Mediums went mad, investigators got hoaxed or occasionally scared out of their wits. Reputations burned along with any supernatural lights they chased. And in this instance, one might say they raised an apparition that wasn't content to remain an experiment's footnote. It wrote its own dreadful ending. Let's gently close the chapter on the haunted mirror, dim the gaslight of that Edinburgh study, and step away from the glass. Our path now leads across the Atlantic and back in time a bit, to the sultry, spirit-rich city of New Orleans in the mid-19th century. A very different milieu of prophecy and curses, involving one of the most storied figures of American folklore, Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen. In her realm, prophecy intermingles with religion and magic, and the price paid is often whispered of in tales of cursed objects and tragic fates. Let us stroll now under Spanish moss and gaslit verandas to meet the Queen of Cards and see what fortunes and misfortunes she dealt in her time. In the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter, where narrow streets twine between balconies draped in wrought iron and trailing vines, the air is thick with the mingled scents of magnolia blossoms, river mud, and faint incense. The year is 1853. Dusk falls with a warm, languid embrace, and gas lanterns flicker to life, casting dancing shadows on the cobblestones of St. Anne Street. Here, not far from the St. Louis Cathedral and Jackson Square, stands a cottage modest in size but outsized in reputation. This is the home of Marie Laveau, the legendary voodoo queen of New Orleans. Step inside the parlor. The walls are pale plaster, adorned with Catholic saints' images and Vive symbols, chalked faintly near the baseboards. An altar in one corner holds candles, a small crucifix, offerings of fruit and coins, and a clay serpent figurine, homage to Damballa perhaps, or to the spirit world at large. The evening breeze wafts through the open window, ruffling the light gauze curtains, as a line of supplicants quietly forms by the door. They have come, as so many have, seeking Marie's help. A blessing, a cure, a curse lifted, a lover returned, a glimpse of destiny. Marie Laveau glides into the room, dignity and warmth in her bearing. She is in her early 50s now, tall and poised, her complexion a warm café au lait. A brightly coloured tignon wraps her hair, and she wears a simple cotton dress suitable for the heat. Her eyes, dark and keen, take in each visitor with penetrating understanding. Born around 1801, Marie has been practicing her arts for decades, a unique blend of African spirituality, native Creole tradition, and Catholic devotion. By day, she is known as a hairdresser and confidant to the wealthy ladies of New Orleans. By night, a leader of ceremonies at the Bayou St. John on St. John's Eve, and the solver of personal dilemmas for rich and poor alike. One by one, she attends to those gathered. For an old Spanish sailor troubled by nightmares, she prepares a gris-gris bag of herbs and a prayer to place under his pillow. For a young Creole woman nervous about an upcoming marriage, she offers a small vial of peace water to anoint the marital bed and a quiet blessing for fertility. And then a particular client steps forward, a man with anxious eyes and a costly suit, just slightly frayed at the cuffs. He is Antoine Delille, a sugar planter from upriver, come on urgent business. After polite preliminaries and ensuring privacy from other ears, he confesses his reason. His brother lies gravely ill, raving about seeing ghosts around his bed. Antoine fears it's a curse laid by a rival, and he begs Marie to foretell whether his brother will live or die, and if die, how to thwart the evil sent against his family. Marie listens carefully. Divining life and death is serious work, and dangerous as we've seen, but it's said she has the sight when she needs it. Some accounts claim she had a special pack of fortune-telling cards that she used in critical moments, while most times she might throw cowrie shells or examine the patterns of dripping wax or listen to the messages of spirits through trance. Tonight she opts for the cards, perhaps because the situation is delicate. She does not publicly display tarot or such for just anyone. It's a more private tool. From a carved wooden box on her altar, Marie Laveau retrieves a deck of cards, not the standard 52 playing cards, though she's adept with those too, but a tarot de Marseille, worn, edges yellowed, said to be an inheritance from her maternal grandmother, who was a free woman of color from Santo Domingo. But local legend insists these are no ordinary cards. Rumor has it, Marie anointed them with sacrificial blood and palm oil in a powerful ceremony years ago, imbuing them with a spirit. Hence they whisper truths, but carry a bite, a bit like handling a live wire of fate. She shuffles the tarot deck with a rhythmic, almost ritual motion. The parlor falls silent except for the soft slap of cards. Antoine de Lille watches with rapt, fearful hope. 3 candles on the altar suddenly sputter as if in a gust, though the air is still. Marie begins to lay out a spread on a small table between them, murmuring a prayer under her breath, mixing Catholic and African tongues. Her fingertips rest on each card briefly as she places it face down. Antoine wipes sweat from his brow, though it's not so hot with the window open. A nervous fever grips him. Marie flips the first card. L'Étoile, the star. A card of hope and guidance, usually auspicious. She hums. This is the light in the darkness. Have faith. Antoine leans forward. The next card, La Lune, the moon. A murky card of illusions, fears, possibly madness. Marie's eyebrow arches slightly. The third, L'amour, death. The skeletal rider with scythe, cutting down heads and limbs. Antoine gasps audibly. Mon Dieu! Marie holds up a calming hand. Not so fast, cher. Death card often means transformation, not literal death. But her own heart has given a lurch seeing it. Given the context, it might be literal. She draws another card for clarification. It is Le Diable, the devil, depicted as a horned beast enthroning the chained figures. Even Marie sucks in a quick breath at that one. A chain of major arcana this potent is rare. Star, moon, death, devil. It reads like a progression of a dire saga. Antoine is on the verge of panic. Please, Madame Laveau, tell me plain, what do you see? Is my brother cursed to die? He pleads. Marie Laveau, maintaining composure, studies the interplay of symbols. The star, hope in spirit, perhaps the brother's soul shining, or an ancestral protection. The moon, something hidden, possibly witchcraft at work or illusions causing his madness. Death, likely signifying he stands at the threshold, perhaps inevitable, or at least a drastic change. The devil, this could be the curse or negative force indeed binding him. She feels a prickle of spiritual intuition. Candle flames bend as if in a breeze, though none passes. She senses another presence, perhaps Papa Legba, or one of the lower hinting to her mind. She decides honesty paired with guidance is best. Softly she speaks. I see that your brother is under a dark cloud, yes. There is maleficence, a mauvais esprit, around him. Antoine's face falls. But, she continues, tapping the star, there is hope yet if we act swiftly. The man eagerly asks what to do. Marie prescribes a ritual, a cleansing bath for the brother with holy water and herbs of protection, a prayer novena to Saint Expedite, the saint of urgent causes, and she will craft a powerful gris-gris to place under the brother's bed to ward off the evil. However, she warns, whether he lives is ultimately in God's hands. The cards suggest a great trial. Perhaps he will recover, but transformed. Or he may pass on if that be his destined time. Antoine, desperate, agrees to anything. Marie moves to her shelves of jars, dried angelica root, salt, verbena. She selects a red flannel pouch and begins assembling the gree-gree, a pinch of graveyard dirt for confronting death, a small bone, chicken bone, inscribed with a protective sigil, a splash of rum to entice the spirits to work quickly, and a scrap of paper on which she writes the afflicted brother's name intertwined with a Vive symbol for Papa Legba, to open the road back to health. She adds a medal, of Saint Expedite. Sealing it up, she passes it through incense smoke, murmuring incantations in Creole patois. While she's doing this, we note on the table the spread of tarot is still lying there ominously. The candle nearest the death card flutters as a moth bumps into it. The little creature then falls, singed, landing directly on the death card. Marie glances at that, a subtle sign. She will do all she can, but she's seen enough in her years to know sometimes the cards don't lie about an outcome. She remembers a time early in her practice when she ignored a death card for a client and gave rosy assurances, and the client's child still died of yellow fever the next week. She learned then not to sugarcoat too far, but Antoine stands trembling for hope, so she offers hope couched in faith. Take these steps, pray hard, and trust in God's mercy. I will also light a candle nightly for your brother's spirit. He thanks her profusely, leaving a generous offering, and indeed, Marie's clients often paid well. She made a good living as a healer and seer. As he leaves, clutching the gree-gree and instructions, the room falls quiet again. Now, at this point, one might think Marie's card-reading practice is just one skill among many she had, and that perhaps it's more psychological counsel than supernatural. But local law insists that Marie Laveau's personal deck, that tarot, or some say a regular playing card deck she anointed with a mixture of blood from sacrifice and palm oil, held a potent magic. They say that whatever she prophesied with those cards would unerringly come to pass, thus she used them sparingly, aware that revealing too much of fate could stir negative forces. A famous or infamous story often told is the legend of the blood-oiled deck itself. According to the tale, Marie Laveau prepared a special deck for ritual use by anointing each card with animal blood, a black rooster's blood specifically, and oil under the full moon, speaking into each card to bind a spirit of truth to it. The cards, after this consecration, became not only tools of divination, but almost living entities that connected with the spirit world. She kept this deck wrapped in silk, separate from ordinary playing cards she might use for simpler fortunes. There are accounts, difficult to verify but persistent in folklore, that after Marie Laveau's death in 1881, if one accepts the widely held date, though some say she never truly died but passed her spirit to her daughter, the deck of cards was either buried with her or hidden away by her family. But in the roaring 1920s, as a cult curiosity spiked again, a story emerged of a certain New Orleans socialite claiming to have gotten hold of Marie Laveau's own tarot. The details vary. Some say a descendant sold it in secret to pay debts, others that it was stolen from the Laveau cottage by a handyman and sold. Whatever the case, this socialite, a woman known for hosting spiritualist salons, bragged of possessing the famed deck and intended to use it in her gatherings. According to legend, that did not go well. One night in 1922, at a fancy Garden District mansion, a small circle of thrill-seekers gathered in a candlelit sitting room to watch her reading with Marie Laveau's cards. The hostess brought out a worn silk bundle, inside an old deck, presumably the one. The onlookers felt a hush as she laid them out, recounting how powerful Marie's readings were. Among those present was a skeptic, a businessman named John, who smirked at the proceedings. The hostess performed a general reading for the group. Eyewitness accounts, likely embellished in retelling, say that as the first card turned up, the devil, one of the candles popped and extinguished by itself. The second card, the tower signifying disaster, was drawn, and at that exact moment a loud cracking noise was heard from somewhere in the house, startling everyone. John the skeptic joked nervously, "Maybe the house really is falling." They continued. The third card revealed was l'amour, death. Immediately the entire candelabra on the mantelpiece supposedly fell over and all lights went out. In the chaos and darkness, people panicked. Some claimed to feel a presence or see a shadow flit across the room. When servants rushed in with lamps, they found one member of the circle, The skeptic John on the floor, unconscious, some versions even say dead, of a heart attack, though likely it's dramatized. That effectively ended the salon, and the cursed cards were blamed. Whether or not that event happened exactly so, the story stuck. It served as a caution that Marie's belongings, especially her ritual tools, were not to be toyed with by dilettantes. Many believed her deck was indeed cursed, or rather, so charged with her powerful magic that anyone unworthy who tried to use it would suffer. There's an echo here of how some folks treat voodoo artifacts with great respect or fear, believing disturbing them invites misfortune. Then there's the tale of the 1920s French Quarter fire linked to Laveau's cards. An antique shop on Royal Street in 1926, run by a quiet Haitian man, was rumoured to hold some of Marie Laveau's effects for sale. A lock of her hair, a bottle of her special cologne, and yes, perhaps a copy of her tarot, or something from her altar. A wealthy New Yorker, intrigued, bought a set of Voodoo Queen fortune-telling cards from this shop, boasting of the prize. Within a week, this is what the local papers reported. The man's house, or hotel suite, caught fire under mysterious circumstances, and though he survived, much of his belongings were destroyed, all except the cards he'd bought, which were found intact amid the ashes, to the astonishment of firemen. Spooked, he apparently gave the cards to the first person who'd take them. Some say he returned them to the shop in terror. That story, printed in a newspaper, the exact references are elusive but a few researchers mention it, further cemented the idea that her artifacts carry protective and destructive force. Beyond these dramatic tales, on a personal scale, many in New Orleans to this day claim that items associated with Marie Laveau, be it her grave dirt, people notoriously chipped at her tomb for pieces until it was placed off limits, her alleged voodoo dolls, or her cards, bring misfortune if handled without respect. Several modern collectors recount eerie experiences. One woman who had a set of playing cards passed down in her family said to be Laveau's encountered poltergeist-like activity at home, until she ceremonially cleansed and respectfully stored them. Another who borrowed a purported Laveau card from a museum display for study with permission, claimed to be haunted by a Creole woman's apparition until he returned it. Skeptics might say these are tall tales or psychological suggestions making people attribute coincidences to the objects. But in the context of our theme, prophecy and its price, it fits that one who wielded prophecy with such intensity could leave behind a charged legacy. Marie Laveau was admired and feared in equal measure. There are those who swore by her blessings and those who quietly blamed her if things went wrong. For instance, if she told someone a hard truth they didn't like, later they might call it a curse when misfortune struck. It's true that in a community for a long time some whispered, if you crossed Marie Laveau or misused her name, bad luck would follow. After her death, stories of people trying to deface her tomb or dismiss her as fraud often involved them coming to grief, slipping and breaking a leg, sudden illnesses, etc. So her myth accrued a guardian-like vengeance. Back to Marie herself in life. As devout a Catholic as she was a vaudoisante, she always stressed the unity of those beliefs. She didn't see her prophetic gift as separate from her faith. She would often say, "Le bon Dieu guides me," the good God guides her. Her fortunes and prophecies usually came intertwined with advice to pray or to do good works as remedies. So unlike a cynical fortune teller who might manipulate, she truly saw herself as a bridge between worlds for the community's healing. Perhaps that sincerity gave her prophecies extra potency. People believed strongly, making them self-fulfilling at times. A particular post-mortem anecdote stands out: the drowning of Jules Duval in 1890. Jules was rumoured to have recovered one of Marie's personal prayer books, and within it a handwritten card reading, or formula. He attempted to replicate her work. Not long after, he was paddling on Bayou St. John and the boat upset. He drowned. Murmurs said he stole from the Queen and paid with his life. More likely, a sad accident turned into a moral fable. Do not steal sacred knowledge. It's not yours to use lightly. Marie Laveau's own end-of-life prophecies are interesting. Some said she predicted the Great New Orleans Fire of 1788, which occurred before she was born, so that's obviously folklore transposing her backwards in time, or more plausibly, the yellow fever epidemics that cyclically hit the city. One story claims in 1878, during a yellow fever outbreak, Elderly Marie rocked on her porch and announced to neighbors that the fever would take exactly X number of souls on her street and then subside at first frost. And that's exactly what happened. There's no record in paper of that, but that sort of tale is told to exemplify her knowledge. In summary, Marie Laveau's use of prophecy was deeply integrated with her practice of voodoo and healing, and any curses or misfortunes attached were not in the telling itself. She tried to help people with the knowledge, but seemingly attached to the misuse of her legacy. The curse of the Queen's cards might be interpreted as a safeguard. Only those with proper respect, and perhaps her bloodline or spiritual lineage, can wield such prophecy tools without harm. It's a common theme in magical lore. The gifted artifact punishes the unworthy. So, what became of that central question with Antoine and his brother? In one local chapbook from the early 1900s, recounting Laveau legends, it says the brother did indeed die despite all efforts, but Marie's rituals protected the rest of the family from the curse rebounding to claim more victims. Another variant says the brother survived, but was never the same, mentally touched by the ordeal. However, interestingly, they say Marie's gree-gree bag placed under his bed was found decades later when the house was renovated, and when touched by a worker, that worker fell ill. More spookifying of her items. From this rich gumbo of stories, one distills that prophecy under Marie Laveau was not free trifles. They were part of a web of cause and effect that had to be treated with reverence. If she foresaw something, steps had to be taken to address it. One couldn't just shrug it off. Those who ignored her warnings reportedly regretted it. At least that's how the law goes. For instance, a tale of a man she told, "Do not travel by lake this week," or "danger," who ignored her and his boat sank in a sudden storm. Typical cautionary anecdote repeated enough to become fact in community memory. Marie Laveau's cards, her predictions, and the surrounding mystical consequences form a Creole chapter in the grand narrative of the costs of foreknowledge. The future in her hands was a tool to heal or to warn, but even she, the wise queen, could not always soften the blows of fate. She could only help folks meet them with some spiritual armor, and woe betide those from later generations who treated her powers as mere parlor tricks. They found out the hard way that in New Orleans the past isn't dead and gone. It watches, perhaps through the eyes on an old painted card, waiting to remind you that every spell and every prophecy carries a price or a lesson. Now, leaving the gaslit streets where the echoes of Marie's footsteps fade, let us journey far across the ocean to the misty heights of the Carpathians, around the dawn of the 20th century, where another form of wandering prophecy takes shape in the figure of a mysterious Romani fortune-teller on a lonely road. There, prejudice and fate intermingle under pine forest and starlight, and a single warning cry, "You will ride in black," might follow a traveler to the grave. It is the turn of the 20th century, deep in the Carpathian mountains that span Transylvania and Bukovina. The landscape is a romantic's fever dream, jagged peaks cloaked in fir trees, narrow winding roads edged by steep drops, small wooden villages huddled in valleys, with onion-domed churches peeking out. At twilight, tendrils of mist snake between the pines, and the sky burnishes purple behind the silhouettes of the higher ranges. Into this scene comes a lone horse-drawn carriage, trotting along a mountain road, the hooves clip-clop echoing against rock faces. Inside the carriage sits Ștefan Cantacuzene, a middle-aged gentleman traveler from Bucharest. He is a minor official on a journey to Vienna for a diplomatic posting, taking a provincial route for the experience of it. Ștefan is educated, somewhat skeptical of superstitions, but he carries the faint nervousness of a city man traversing wild lands full of wolf legends and strigoi, vampire tales. The sun has set and the coachman up front urges the horses on, keen to reach the next inn before full dark. As they round a bend near a dense patch of forest, the carriage suddenly slows. In the road stands a small encampment, a painted wooden caravan wagon pulled aside, a couple of ragged tents, a dying campfire. A group of Romani travelers appears to be resting there by the roadside. Ștefan peers out the window. A tall, dark-haired man in a red sash holds the reins of a restive horse that nearly bolted. Next to him, a slender older woman, wrapped in a shawl with coin jewelry, glinting in the dim light, steps forward and raises a hand to the coachman. The coachman curses under his breath, He, like many of his class, holds a deep distrust of the Romani, considering them ill-fortuned wanderers or worse. The carriage halts. The woman approaches Stefan's window directly, moving with an unexpected quiet grace. "Good evening," she says softly. Even in the gloom, Stefan sees her eyes, intensely reflective, catching the last light like an animal's for a second. It sends a small shiver through him. She asks for a little something to help them on their way, implying money or food. Stefan, a bit wary but polite, fishes a few coins from his travel purse. As he hands them down to her palm, her fingers briefly touch his. The old woman suddenly clutches his hand and stares at it, or rather, at the lines on his palm. Stefan, startled, tries to pull back, but her grip is surprisingly strong. She looks up at him and speaks rapidly in Romanian with an odd accent. "I see a road in your hand, and a darkness upon it." Stefan's heart lurches. The coachman interjects angrily, "Ignore her, sir." They'll say anything, but Stefan is caught by the woman's tone. Urgent, almost pleading. "What do you mean, good mother?" he asks, half compelled. Her weathered face, lined with years of wandering and worry, appears troubled. "I must give warning. You will ride in black before the next moon is full if you go on as you are." Her choice of words is cryptic. Stefan frowns. "Ride in black? I don't understand." She glances at the carriage, the direction of his travel. "The road ahead, do not take it on the night of St. George's Eve, April 22nd to 23rd. If you do, you will ride in black, the black coach, the coach of death." She releases his hand finally, making the sign of the cross for protection. An interesting syncretism, since she likely also holds her own Romani spiritual beliefs. The coachman has had enough. "Begone, witch," he spits, cracking the whip. The horses jolt forward. The woman steps back gracefully, no anger on her face, only sorrow. As the carriage pulls away, Stefan hears her sing out almost in a chant, "You will ride in black." Her voice echoes off the rocks until they round another curve and lose sight of the encampment. Stefan sits back, heart pounding. The rational part of his mind dismisses this as a generic doom-saying aimed to spook him, maybe to prompt a bigger tip or to justify some petty theft, later by playing on his fears. The Carpathians have no shortage of such eerie folklore. But another part of him, the part steeped in half-remembered childhood stories his grandmother told of old mountain magic and wandering spirits, is deeply unsettled. Ride in black, coach of death. It brings to mind local superstition of the Morte Neagra, a black carriage said to roam on certain nights collecting souls, similar to Western Europe's Wild Hunt, or the coach that carries the dead to the afterlife. Could she mean that? Perhaps just a metaphor that he'll be in a hearse soon. Either way, she warned specifically about St. George's Eve, a night known in Eastern Europe for being fraught with evil. Indeed, in Romanian law, St. George's Eve is when the strigoi, troubled spirits and vampires, are most active. Many avoid travel that night and stay indoors with garlic hung at windows. Stefan, as a modern man, had planned to ignore such peasant customs. Now he's not so sure. A week later, Stefan's journey has taken him through Transylvania, and he stays in a small town inn on April 22nd. The morning of the 23rd, St. George's Day, he's due to travel the next leg through a forested pass. That entire day of the 22nd, he's been mulling, should he delay departure until after this fateful eve passes, just in case? It would cost him time, and he's expected in Vienna by a deadline. And for what? The word of an old travelling woman? The innkeeper that evening even advises him, "Tomorrow you ride out? Best leave after sunrise, sir. We local folk do not travel St. George's Eve night." Stefan chuckles outwardly, saying he has a timetable, but inside he's wavering. As twilight falls on the 22nd, a heavy fog rolls in, as it often does in these parts. The coachman, who's also heard the warning and is privately a bit fearful, suggests, "Perhaps we leave at first light. The horses need rest." Stefan seizes that practical excuse to mask his own superstition and agrees. They settle in at the inn one more night. Midnight approaches. The village is silent, shuttered tight. Many homes keep a candle burning all night to ward off evil. Stefan dozes in and out in his creaky bed, dreams filled with images of black horses and a cackling shadow driving them. But the night passes without incident, at least apparently. Come morning, the fog persists in patchy swirls. Stefan's carriage heads out shortly after dawn. The tension from last night eases with daylight. Both he and coachman feel a bit silly for the fear. They joke lightly about it as wheels grind along a rutted dirt road, ascending into a pass between tall firs. About an hour into the journey, in a narrow gorge, they find their path blocked. A cart carrying logs has overturned. An accident. The road is strewn with timber, and a few peasants are trying to move the blockage. It will take some time. Stefan dismounts to stretch his legs while waiting. The air is chilly and still. A peasant mutters about bad omens last night to another. Stefan catches snippets. Apparently the village mill's dog howled all night, and some locals claim they saw strange lights in the woods. The other man responds, St. George chased the devils away by dawn, praise God. Eventually the logs are cleared enough to pass, and Stefan's carriage continues, but now they're a few hours delayed. This means they might not reach the next planned town by nightfall. Sure enough, dusk finds them still on the mountain road, with at least 2 hours to go. The coachman lights a lantern and they press on under a rising moon. The scene is almost a mirror of the night Stefan encountered the old Romani woman, stirring his memory. They pick up speed to hasten through a moor-like plateau fringed by forest, and that's when the horses unexpectedly whinny in alarm and come to a shuddering stop, nearly tossing the coachman. He curses and steadies them. Stefan looks out. Ahead on the road, barely visible in the lantern light, something large is lying across it. The coachman takes the lantern and goes closer, then recoils. It's a dead horse, a black stallion, fresh, still bleeding from an apparent attack. Wolf bites on the flank. No sign of rider or saddle, perhaps a stray. The horses refuse to step nearer. It's a harrowing obstacle to find at night. As they carefully maneuver around the carcass, tension is high. Stefan's heart thumps. The omen feels too on the nose. A black horse dead on the path, as if the very idea of riding black embodied in corpse. Even the coachman is muttering prayers. They manage past it and continue faster now, wanting distance from that scene. But fate isn't done. Not 10 minutes later, as they descend through a grove at a reckless speed, one of the carriage wheels strikes something, a rock or rut, and with a loud crack, the wheel axle splits. The carriage lurches and topples onto its side, flinging Stefan and the driver out. Shocked and bruised, Stefan staggers up to find the carriage wrecked, one horse injured and the other freed and bolted. The driver is conscious but has hurt his arm. They are stranded in darkness on the mountainside. It's quiet except for the driver's groans and the distressed whinny of the hurt horse. Stefan quickly binds what he can. They decide the driver will stay with the injured animal and carriage, and Stefan should walk back a mile or so to the last village for help. Stefan hesitates to leave him, but the driver insists. His arm needs a doctor and the horse can't move, so better to bring villagers to help. Arming himself with a lantern and the driver's pistol, for wolves, Stefan starts trudging back up the road. The night seems vast and ominous now that he's on foot, alone. The stars are brilliant but cold. Trees cast long claw-like shadows in his lantern's amber glow. That's when he hears it. Faint hoofbeats behind him. Perhaps travelers coming who could help. He stops and turns, peering back up the road he came. Through the veil of darkness, he sees an approaching shape, a carriage drawn by black horses, coming at an oddly fast, relentless pace, no light atop it. For a second, he's relieved at the prospect of rescue, but as it nears, something about it chills his blood. The carriage is entirely black lacquered wood draped in black cloth, even black plumes on the horses. It looks like a hearse, an old-style funeral coach such as he's seen in city corteges, it barreling forward without sound. The hoofbeats he hears don't match the speed, like an echo out of sync. He waves his lantern and calls out. No sign of a driver on the seat. The reins seem to trail, yet the coach and horses move with purpose. It's now upon him. Fear paralyzes Stefan a moment too long. The black horses swerve only minimally to avoid him. One hoof strikes his lantern from his hand, shattering it. The coach wheels narrowly miss, running him down as he jumps aside, stumbling into the ditch. He gets a glimpse through the glass side of the coach. Inside is utter darkness. No, wait. Perhaps a form seated within, but obscured by black curtains fluttering. A sense of intense cold emanates as it passes. The black coach hurtles on down the road, and Stefan hears those phantom hoofbeats recede. Shaking, he scrambles up. The lantern is out, so he stands in darkness except for moonlight. His rational mind says, some runaway funeral coach? But who drives horses that fast on this road at night? And why no driver visible? He recalls with razor clarity the traveller's warning. You will ride in black before next moon is full. The moon overhead is just past full. It's been a few weeks since he saw her, and indeed, did he not nearly just get carried off by a black coach of death? Adrenaline surges. He must get back to the driver or village as soon as possible, not stay here. He picks up the fallen pistol, thankfully unbroken, and starts running down the road the direction the coach went, which is also the way to the village. Mind races. If that wasn't an apparition, maybe it was some local noble's hearse out late for weird reasons. But who drives invisibly? More likely a supernatural warning or attempt on him. The prophecy might be still unfolding. As he rounds a bend, he finds something that makes him nearly cry out. The black coach stands parked at a crossroads, clearing a short distance ahead. Horses quiet, steam rising from them, as if waiting. But still no driver. Summoning courage, Stefan grips the pistol and approaches cautiously. Perhaps some trickster is playing with him. He edges near enough to see the horse's eyes. Red glints in the moonlight as they stare at him unnaturally. The carriage door is slightly ajar, swinging open. Stefan's blood chills. It's like an invitation. A foolish urge. Part of him feels drawn to look inside that coach, to dispel doubt. Is it empty, or is death itself sitting there? Another part screams to run. He decides to do neither. Instead, he aims the pistol into the air and fires, hoping the noise might break whatever enchantment or alert villagers nearby. The gunshot cracks the night, echoing. The black horses suddenly rear and whinny at the sound, and with that the carriage door slams shut as if yanked from inside. The team surges forward again, turning down one fork of the crossroads, not towards the village but the other way, which Stefan knows leads to an old cemetery on a hill. The driver's seat remains conspicuously empty as the black coach careens off and vanishes into the night, leaving Stefan alone at the crossroads, heart hammering. Moments later, a distant answering shout, villagers having heard the shot. A group of men with lanterns, on alert due to the weirdness of St. George's, find Stefan there half in shock. He babbles somewhat incoherently about a black coach. Some exchange glances. There are local folk tales of the Morsi Karul, the cart of the dead, seen on certain nights. They decide not to question now, but help him back. They retrieve the injured driver and help salvage belongings from the broken carriage. By morning, Stefan is safe in a warm cottage in the village, recovering. He keeps mostly silent about the details to the uninitiated. He doesn't want to sound insane, but to the headman of the village privately, he confides what happened. The headman solemnly tells him, "You are lucky. The black coach rarely misses its passenger. It seems you cheated it, perhaps due to that gunshot or simply God's grace." Stefan realizes that if he had been in his carriage, had he not delayed per the warning, at around midnight on St. George's Eve, coming through that pass, he might have met this thing when no one could help. The warning likely saved his life. Before leaving the village a couple of days later, by then they've got new transportation and the driver's arm is mended in a sling, Stefan seeks out any Romani camp or person to relay thanks to the old fortune teller, but they have moved on and he cannot find her. In his travel diary, which a descendant supposedly preserved, Stefan wrote, "I entered these mountains skeptical and proud. I leave them humbled, my reason strained by what I cannot fully explain. A woman of the roads taught me caution in fate's face. I think perhaps an angel was in her, though her guise was of the least in society. I owe her my life." The motif, "you will ride in black," became a sort of proverb in that region for a dire, fate-laden warning. Travelers for years after would caution each other jokingly, "Don't ride in black, friend," if someone was doing something foolhardy. But behind the joke lay belief. Even up to the World Wars, Romani fortune tellers in Carpathian villages were both sought and feared for their prophecies. They often couched warnings in metaphor, as the old woman did, likely to soften the bluntness. Saying you will die outright is considered by many seers, globally, as unwise, better to speak in symbols. The phrase "ride in black" became one of those regional euphemisms for ending up in a hearse or funeral procession. This story also highlights the prejudice angle. Stefan initially dismisses her partly due to the widespread notion that locals claimed the Romani cursed people for fun or profit, a cruel stereotype passed down for generations. Indeed, the coachman's reaction, "Witch," shows that. Romani folk often had to use crafty phrasing because a direct warning might get them attacked or driven off as ill omens. Yet despite such treatment, many still gave warnings or advice out of genuine belief or second sight. Another aspect, the psychological weight of prophecy on the victim. Stefan, after receiving the prophecy, became hyper-aware. Some might argue it was his altered behavior, delaying being jumpy, that ironically steered him into trouble, fulfilling prophecy. Alternatively, had he ignored it, maybe nothing would have happened, or maybe he'd straight up have died. We can't know. The story is framed that the prophecy helped him avert death, but one could see it as the prophecy also put him through great mental anguish and a harrowing ordeal. Would ignorance have been bliss? Perhaps until the end, but he'd prefer this outcome. As for the old Romani woman, one wonders what spurred her to insist on warning him. Did she truly see a vision of that black coach trailing him? Perhaps she lost someone to it before and felt compelled to save another. The tale, especially as retold by campfires or in cheap chapbooks of the era, sometimes gave her a backstory. For example, she once foresaw a nobleman's death by black coach, but was ignored, and that man died. So now she tries to never let someone ignore such a warning again. Or she lost a son to an accident on St. George's Eve, and in sorrow tries to prevent others' doom. These humanizing touches vary, but universally she's depicted not as a cursing Romani stereotype, but as a kind of wandering wise woman or harbinger, reflecting a sympathetic view of Romani, perhaps rare in mainstream but present in folklore, where they sometimes play the role of the mysterious helper, like in some Victorian literature, the Romani woman giving a fateful fortune. Like in Jane Eyre, Rochester dresses as one to spook Jane, playing on that archetype. Despite increased policing and prejudice, Romani diviners persisted through Europe, keeping alive palmistry, cartomancy, etc. People simultaneously feared and sought them. The old expression born from that legend became a warning in itself, a phrase meaning a warning that unfortunately often comes true or is dire. By the early 1900s, sensational magazines would publish true supernatural experiences, including things like, "An old roadside seer once warned me of my death and saved my life," fueling fascination. This story fits that mold nicely, possibly one of many that circulated, blending genuine Romani folklore with a dash of Gothic drama. In the quiet Carpathian hamlet, elders might still recount around All Hallows how Stefan Cantacuzene encountered the devil's own coach and lived, all because he heeded a wanderer's caution, and how not all who receive such a warning are so wise, implying there are graves on that mountain of those who didn't listen. Thus ends that piece of the tapestry, a warning cry in the Carpathians where prophecy, prejudice, and the thin line between life and death cross paths on a moonlit road. Now, as our night's journey through prophecy's shadows nears modern times, we must consider that the desire for glimpsing fate never died. It only moved to new settings. In the neon-lit sprawl of contemporary cities and the boundless ether of the internet, psychics and fortune-tellers still thrive, and so do those who become ensnared by their promises. Our next exploration leads us into the 21st century, into quiet living rooms and courtrooms and chat rooms, where the old human hunger to know the future meets exploitation and obsession, and where curses take a new form in psychological dependency. The names change, but the undercurrent is timeless. Those who seek prophecy in desperation and the shadow it can cast on their souls. Let us continue then into the realm of modern psychics and see how foreknowledge and fear dance in our own present day. It is the year 2025 in a suburb of the American Northwest. In a modest single-family home, Ellen sits at her kitchen table in the dim light of dawn. Scattered before her are the remnants of a personal disaster. Credit card statements with staggering balances, court documents for a fraud case, and printouts of dozens of emails and chat transcripts with titles like Curse Removal Session Number 14 and Aura Cleansing Payment Confirmation. Ellen, 42, still can't fully believe how she got here. She was a sensible professional once, a dental hygienist, with some savings and a small but happy life. Then 2 years ago, in a period of loneliness after her divorce and fearful for her sick father's health, she clicked on an online psychic hotline ad that changed her trajectory. Scrolling through her phone now, she rereads some of those initial messages from an Instagram spiritual advisor she came to trust implicitly. It started harmlessly. A free tarot reading online that pegged her as surrounded by negative energy. Then came the upsell. For just $50, the psychic, calling herself Sophia Angelica, could do a deep reading. Ellen paid via Cash App. The reading was startling. Sophia claimed to see a dark curse on Ellen's love life, supposedly placed by someone jealous. Ellen's heart pounded. It made sense. Her marriage had inexplicably fallen apart. Maybe this explained it. Sophia offered to perform a special ceremony to lift the curse for $200. Thus, the hook was set. As dawn's light strengthens, Ellen looks at a framed photo on the wall. Her father, smiling on a fishing trip years ago. He passed away last spring. Around that time is when the situation with the psychic had spiraled completely out of control. In her grief, Ellen leaned even more on Sophia's services, desperate to know her dad was at peace, desperate to fix any karmic issues to protect her remaining family. Sophia, sensing the vulnerability, recommended ever more elaborate and expensive rituals, burning thousands of dollars of special candles, buying rare crystals, all to channel healing to your father's soul and protect your family. One invoice shows $5,000 for a golden bridge ceremony, another $3,500 for 40 nights of prayer on your behalf by a master medium. Ellen wipes away tears. She believed it was all real at the time, that these were necessary acts to avert horrible fates Sophia foretold, like her sister's cancer returning, or her own soul being lost to darkness. Fear upon fear, and all the while Sophia spoke to her, daily, kindly, encouragingly. It became a lifeline. Ellen was effectively possessed by belief, to the point that she'd alienated friends who told her it was a scam. She didn't listen. She even took a second mortgage to pay the psychic. Over 18 months, she paid roughly $60,000. Her entire inheritance from her father, gone. And none of the promised relief materialized. What did materialize was a savvy prosecutor in the Northeast cracking down on fortune-telling fraud. The supposed angelic guide was not an angelic guide at all, but part of a small ring of con artists. This was a notorious psychic scammer who had made headlines in recent years in the South and now again more recently in the Northeast for defrauding multiple people. The case is now in court, which is why all these papers litter Ellen's table. She's been working with law enforcement, her testimony a key piece. It's a cold comfort. The money is mostly unrecoverable, spent by the fraudster on who knows what luxury. Ellen must confront how her mind was twisted by prophecy and fear. As she sips cold tea, she recalls how it felt. The dependence. At first, each reading gave her a high, a sense of control or insight. But soon the content turned dark, warnings that calamity loomed unless she followed specific steps, which conveniently cost money. The psychological trap was sprung. The fraudster employed the classic psychic curse scam, instill fear of a dire fate, then present herself as the only one who can prevent it, for an ever-increasing fee. It's an old grift. Versions of it date back centuries, just like earlier stories in our journey show. But in modern times, it's packaged slickly. Websites, Instagram posts of candles and positive affirmations, etc. Ellen's not alone. As part of the case, she's met another victim, Marjorie, a woman from Queens, New York. Marjorie's story had an even more tragic twist. One of her loved ones took their own life during the time they were entangled with a psychic, and afterward, Marjorie and others experienced what they believed were haunting phenomena, doors slamming, the deceased's favorite song randomly playing. They, desperate for closure, turned to a local medium who unfortunately also manipulated them, stringing them along with messages from the other side while charging hefty sums. When the ghostly events continued, likely because they were driven by the family's emotional turbulence and possible natural occurrences, the medium insisted it was because the spirit was restless and needed more rituals, paid ones. It became a cycle reminiscent of drug addiction. The family kept coming back for sessions seeking relief from guilt and grief, spending tens of thousands. But each contact with the spirit via the medium only deepened their emotional dependency and arguably inflamed the haunting. perhaps not literally the dead man's ghost, but the psychological presence of him in their minds, magnified by constant focus. One family member reported that after a particularly intense seance, she began having nightmares of being possessed by her late brother's sadness, like the very act of these readings had opened a door in her psyche that couldn't be shut. The medium, confronted later by investigators, admitted to faking the phenomena and exploiting the family's belief. A clear case of how unscrupulous prophecy or contact with beyond can lead to literal mental health crises, depression, hallucinations spurred by suggestion, etc. Marjorie now sometimes wakes at 3 a.m., hearing or thinking she hears her brother sobbing, an imprint of trauma that the fraudulent medium inadvertently helped etch deeper. Another facet, the fraudster, who used various aliases including mystical-sounding names, often claimed that if victims didn't continue paying for curse removal, not only they but their loved ones would suffer horribly. Divorce, death, accidents. This preyed on their protective instincts. When victims tried to stop, she would say, "It's dangerous to stop now. The evil has been stirred. It will retaliate." So out of terror, they'd continue. It's a kind of hostage situation with fate as the captor. Some victims developed severe anxiety disorders. One even had a brief stint of inpatient psychiatric care after a breakdown, believing she was cursed and that dark figures followed her. Likely hallucinations from stress. This is modern possession by belief, not a demon in the head, but an idea, implanted by the psychic, that colonizes the person's thoughts and controls their choices. They become, in effect, a thrall to the prophecy. There is a testimony among the case files from a victim saying, "I felt like I couldn't breathe unless I got reassurance from the psychic that the curse was held at bay for another day. I was afraid to get out of bed otherwise. That's as real a curse as any, psychological slavery." From the fraudster's perspective, ironically, they sometimes begin to believe their own lies too. One forensic psychologist theorized that long-term psychic con artists develop a blurred line. They get adept at cold reading and guesswork that hits enough. They start fancying they do have a gift. The fraudster in an interview claimed she actually helped some people with good advice and that she did sense energies, denial, and justification. Beyond personal scams, the modern digital age creates a whole new frontier. Algorithmic prophecy. People turn to horoscope apps, tarot bots, YouTube card readings en masse. While most of these are benign entertainment, some can become like daily crutches. There's a documented case in Singapore of a woman who got addicted to a tarot app's advice so extremely that she lost her job, spent all work hours, consulting the app on any decision. She wrote about it in a blog. "I was checking it morning, lunch, and night. If it gave a bad omen for the day, I literally acted that out. I'd be sluggish, pessimistic, thereby fulfilling the prediction." It became a self-made prison. Back in the northeast, Ellen stands up from the table as morning sun floods the kitchen. She gathers the documents, evidence to hopefully ensure the fraudster's sentencing is just. The district attorney had told her and the other victims that by coming forward they likely saved others from falling into the same trap. It gives Ellen some small sense of meaning out of the ordeal. But recovery is slow. Trusting her own intuition again is hard. She admits to her therapist she still catches herself thinking, "Maybe I really was cursed. What if the curse comes back now that the psychic's not working on it?" Her rational mind knows it's nonsense, but fear is an entity not easily exorcised, even when the exorcist was a fraud. The therapist calls it a trauma bond with the perpetrator. Looking broader, this modern chapter shows that while the trappings changed, neon storefront psychics instead of oracles at Delphi, phone hotlines instead of tea leaf readers, the core dynamic remains. People yearn for insight, especially in grief or fear. Unscrupulous seers exploit that. A cycle of dependency and suggestion forms, often leading to psychological, financial, or even physical ruin. Some victims, bankrupt, have considered ending it all, ironically fulfilling the deepest doom. There's also the example of Her World Testimony, we presumed, an article in a women's magazine where someone confessed to psychic addiction. Indeed, there have been articles with titles like, "I couldn't stop consulting psychics," describing how one reading leads to another for second opinions, like a gambler chasing validation. The Barnum effect, where general statements feel personally true, and the intermittent reward, sometimes the psychic says something spot on or comforting, hooking the client. make it hard to break the habit. And unlike a one-time purchase, these services can string on indefinitely, always a new looming threat to avert or secret to reveal. The modern seance on smartphones that we mentioned earlier. Think of push notifications from a horoscope app or daily tarot TikToks. Many are harmless fun, but for some they become a replacement for healthy coping. Instead of doing what one's common sense would, one might delay decisions waiting for the reading of the day. Meanwhile, unscrupulous automated services sometimes milk money similarly. For premium star guidance, click here, $9.99 a week. An algorithm doesn't have feelings, it just senses one's engagement and feeds more of what keeps one hooked, which might be fear-laden content if that's what a person interacts with. In that sense, the new spirits or demons could be said to be those algorithms, possessing people's attention and leading them down self-reinforcing prophecy rabbit holes. We even see a subculture of live-streamed psychic readings, where chat viewers keep paying to ask questions. Some become minor celebrities, and their loyal fans hang on every word about their lives, almost like having a personal guru. This parasocial dependency means if the streamer were to say, "I see danger around you," it might genuinely distress some watchers into paying for follow-ups or making changes, which can sometimes be dangerous advice like telling someone to cut off family or quit job due to bad vibes. There have been tragic cases of such suggestions leading to real harm. The law is catching up slowly. Fortune-telling is not outright illegal in most places, except some archaic local ordinances, but fraud is. The psychic scammer in the Northeast was charged under theft and fortune-telling statutes, not because saying you remove curses is banned per se. People have a right to pay for spiritual services, but because she knowingly lied to fleece, which is actionable. In New York City, where fortune-telling is technically illegal unless for entertainment, it rarely gets enforced except in glaring scam cases. From these contemporary accounts, the central theme emerges strongly: the surrender of one's agency to prophecy and the shadow it casts. The victims gave over decision-making, money, time, essentially a piece of their life force, to the prophecy and the prophet. They ceased to be fully authors of their story and became reactors to a script someone else wrote. That is perhaps the ultimate curse, the loss of one's freedom to choose, unencumbered by dread. As we conclude this section, we remind ourselves that these modern shadows are really old ghosts in new garb. The price of prophecy remains heavy, financially, mentally, spiritually. Yet people still line up at psychic fairs and call hotlines, because hope and fear are eternal bedfellows in the human heart. It is nearly dawn in our narrative journey too, but before we reach conclusion, it behooves us to step back and analyze the pattern we've seen across ages, distilling the recurring truths. In the penultimate chapter, we will discuss the unwritten laws and taboos that society has tried to enforce around fortune-telling, hinting that humanity collectively knew of prophecy's double-edged nature. And then, with perspective gained, we shall gently close our journey pondering whether the mercy lies in the unknown and what remains after all these stories of glimpses beyond the veil. Across time and cultures, even as people chased after prophets and soothsayers, they also erected laws and taboos to contain or forbid those practices. It is a remarkable paradox. The very societies that consult oracles will in the next breath condemn them. Perhaps because deep down, humanity has long recognized the dangerous power in foreknowledge, a power that must be checked. In ancient Greece, while oracles like Delphi thrived, with state sponsorship no less, there were also admonitions. The oracle's own pronouncements often carried the subtle warning: know thyself and nothing in excess. The caution, "don't ask too much," was embedded in how the oracle answered, cryptically, forcing the seeker to remain humble and interpret rather than receive plain certainty. Consider Croesus of Lydia, who asked Delphi if he should go to war. The oracle said, "If you cross the Halys, you will destroy a great empire." He assumed it meant the enemy's empire. In fact, it was his own. Thus, one unwritten rule: the gods themselves don't like being cornered. They give answers that preserve mystery. Delphi's priests likely learned this as a protective strategy, both for themselves, never commit too plainly or you'll be blamed, and for the petitioner, so they won't treat prophecy as absolute and discard prudence. In Judeo-Christian tradition, we see explicit written laws. Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12 which we cited earlier, outright forbids divination, sorcery, talking to the dead, labeling them abominations. This became a foundation for church doctrine through the ages. Medieval church law equated fortune-telling with either fraud or trafficking with the devil. Yet, ironically, that same church had its sanctioned seers, saints with visions, biblical prophets venerated. So it's not the concept of prophecy they hated. It was unsanctioned prophecy, not under ecclesiastical control. Why? Perhaps because a prophet can wield influence rivaling authority, be it priest or king. So, one law of fortune-telling is a political one. Centralize and control it, or else ban it. That's how you get things like the Witchcraft Act of 1735 in England, which effectively said, no one can claim magical powers or tell fortunes. If they do, they're a con artist. They reframed it as a crime of false pretense rather than heresy by then. An enlightened, rational approach, but still, it suppressed the practice legally. The 1824 Vagrancy Act in England similarly included fortune-tellers under rogues and vagabonds. This reflects the social view. Roaming fortune-tellers, often Romani or other itinerants, were lumped in with petty criminals, not due to evidence of harm always, but prejudice and the sense they undermined proper work ethics and perhaps stirred superstition in the populace. Tellingly, many prosecuted under these acts were women trying to scrape a living with palmistry or local wise folk. The law stamped an official disapproval, but didn't extinguish demand. It drove it more to clandestine settings. In America, New York's law, on the books since 1967, we looked at, forbids charging a fee for occult services except for entertainment. It's rarely enforced, mostly kept in the toolbox for clear abuses. But its existence signals that even in modern secular society, there's a recognition. Fortune-telling in earnest can be exploitative, so we need a statute to potentially rein it in. From legal to cultural taboos, many cultures had unspoken rules about not seeking to know certain things. For example, the oracles of ancient times often refused to answer questions that pried too far into the god's domain, like trying to know immortality, secrets, or the exact manner of one's death, often considered forbidden knowledge. A story from Greek myth stands out. The seer Tiresias was given the gift to foresee, but he was also cursed with personal cost, blindness. The message, see too much, pay the price. Another interesting unwritten law, the ethical duty of the prophet to temper their message. Today, many professional psychics follow a kind of ethical code, often self-imposed or by psychic associations, that they will not predict death or serious illness outright to a client, even if they have a strong feeling. They phrase things gently or focus on prevention and empowerment. This is both to avoid lawsuits and out of humane sense, a code of do no harm, similar to doctors. This code likely evolved from centuries of backlash and understanding that telling someone you will die in 3 months can ruin their life even if untrue. Similarly, it's considered bad form for an astrologer to say, you have a terrible fate, without providing how to mitigate it. Fortune-telling thrives in a balance, enough risk to be credible and prompt action, but enough hope to keep the client invested and functional. When that balance tips, like in our scam cases where it was all fear, no hope and less money, things fall apart. So one could articulate an unwritten rule as, prophecy should leave room for free will. Many honest intuitives emphasize, the cards show possibilities, you have choices. This echoes ancient warnings. The oracle gave Croesus an answer, but it was ambiguous. His misuse sealed him, not the prophecy itself. The admonition often was, if you do get a glimpse, remember it's only a glimpse, not the whole tapestry. On the societal level, fortune-telling laws tried to protect community from chaos. Think of medieval Europe. If every other person ran to the local cunning man to ask who will win a war or who will die next, it could cause panic or undermine morale, maybe causing self-fulfillment of negative prophecy. So forbidding it was partly about maintaining public order and the monopoly of sanctioned religion on metaphysical truth. The 1735 Act in England came partly after the last witch craze. They reframed witches as frauds to stop witch hunts, ironically to protect people. No witches equals no hanging them. So that law was progressive in a sense, shifting view of prophecy from diabolical to deceptive artifice. In more philosophical terms, an unwritten law across philosophies. The future must remain partly veiled for free will to have meaning. If fate is absolutely known, do we become mere actors in a script? Many thinkers wrestled with this. The Church's stance, trust in God's providence, seeking fortune tellers shows lack of faith and invites demonic deception. The Enlightenment stance, trust in reason and probability, seeking fortune tellers shows ignorance and invites charlatans. Different rationale, same advice. Don't overreach to see what isn't yours to see. Yet ironically, states and kings sometimes defied their own bans when convenient. For example, in the 16th century England, even though occultism was suspect, Queen Elizabeth I had John Dee as her astrologer. Napoleon famously had contact with a psychic. So another unwritten law emerges. Fortune telling is tolerated when it aligns with power's interest, but persecuted when it challenges or proliferates uncontrolled. Move to modern day, we see fortunes have been tamed into entertainment by disclaimers, for entertainment only. That's a legal shield to avoid fraud charges. It's almost ritualistic. As long as everyone winks that this is just fun, it can go on. But as we saw, many take it seriously behind that facade. The law doesn't truly stop belief, it just forces it to be couched in acceptable terms. A rarely used New York law we found is telling. It acknowledges fortune-telling's persistent existence but draws a line. Taking advantage of someone's credulity for money is punishable. It's like admitting, we know some want this, but if you cross into exploitation, we'll step in. Then there's an interesting, unwritten cultural law. Don't self-prophesy doom. People say, don't jinx it, or knock on wood. These are everyday micro-policing of prophecy-like statements. If you say, everything's going great, some feel you tempt fate to reverse that. This points to a belief that speaking of future good may somehow ruin it. The universe or jealous spirits might intervene. Conversely, saying, I bet I'll fail, is also discouraged because you might manifest it psychologically. So at the folk level, we manage prophecy by verbal taboos and superstitions. These habits echo ancient taboos, like sailors not saying certain words at sea to avoid bad luck, a kind of negative prophecy prevention. In a real sense, every vow or oath is a sort of prophecy too, promising a future action. Thus, societies crafted ceremonies, marriages sworn oaths of office, to hold people to beneficial prophecies they make for themselves, and penalties if they break them. That's turning prophecy into a tool of order. Finally, one might consider the ultimate unwritten law of fortune-telling. The future protects itself. Each story we've gone through suggests that those who pry too far suffer. Cassandra knew the future but was cursed to not be believed, an ancient tragic law by Apollo. Modern Cassandras, whistleblowers or doomsday scientists, often too are ignored or ridiculed, sometimes to society's peril, but interestingly often to their personal despair, a Cassandra complex. Perhaps this is a kind of narrative law. People only accept as much as they're ready for. Otherwise the seer is ostracized, or the prophecy itself twists to irony. Yet, as we edge to conclusion, maybe it's not malicious fate but mercy that clouds the future, like a merciful veil to allow growth and free will. In our final concluding chapter, we'll reflect gently on that notion, that not knowing may be a grace, and that every one of these cautionary tales we covered carry a whisper. Perhaps it's better not to see too far ahead. Perhaps uncertainty is a gift. We'll now take those threads and weave them into a closing candlelight meditation, where we step back from the darkness and appreciate the wisdom gleaned, that to know too much is to lose innocence, that the veil exists for a reason, and that perhaps prophecy's price, when it exacts tragedy, teaches us to trust in the slow unfolding of time rather than ripping open its secrets prematurely. Throughout our journey, one pattern stands constant. Those who claim the gift of foresight often find it becomes a curse. It is an ancient paradox, voiced in countless myths. Consider the archetypal seer of Greek lore, Cassandra, princess of Troy, blessed by Apollo with true visions, yet cursed by him that none would believe her. In one swift twist, her gift became torment, to see inevitable doom, the Trojan horse, the fall of the city, and to be powerless to avert it as everyone mocked her. She was labeled mad, locked away, ultimately enslaved and killed, a victim of the very knowledge that should have empowered her. Cassandra's name has echoed through ages as the symbol of the unheeded prophet. Was her knowledge a blessing? Far from it. It isolated her utterly, a burden of truth no one else shared. One might say Apollo's curse was ironically a dark mercy on others. By disbelieving Cassandra, the Trojans at least enjoyed hope until the end. She alone bore the full horror in advance. In a different vein stands Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes. His story is winding. He was transformed into a woman for 7 years, later struck blind by goddess Hera for revealing divine secrets, yet granted inner sight by Zeus as compensation. Blind to the world but seeing through the worlds, Tiresias lived unnaturally long, guiding generation after generation, with often painful truths, like telling Oedipus that he himself was the cause of the plague, having killed his father and wed his mother. Every king who consulted Tiresias did so with dread, for his revelations upturned lives, and Tiresias himself, though wise, wandered burdened by that weight. His longevity, to witness the tragic fates of many, seems more punishment than reward. One wonders, did he ever envy normal men their blissful ignorance? Perhaps. Knowledge set him apart, and though celebrated as wise, in myth he, like Cassandra, was largely solitary, a vessel for truth more than a man with his own free path. Zoom out and we see this pattern extended. The gifted often suffer. Shamans in many cultures underwent traumatic initiations, illness, near-death experiences, to gain vision, and many were viewed with a mix of reverence and fear by their people. The biblical prophets, Jeremiah, Elijah, were not happy folk. They were ridiculed, threatened, exiled. Elijah feared for his life constantly as he prophesied against corrupt kings. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet because the truths he had to deliver, the fall of Jerusalem, the exile, broke his heart and made him despised at court. Even in more modern law, visionaries and geniuses often walk the line of madness or social alienation. Think of scientists ahead of their time, labeled heretics or fools. So why does seeing or knowing beyond the norm so often bring suffering? Perhaps because it alienates one from the communal narrative. Humans bond over shared reality and hopes. The seer steps outside that, seeing things that challenge the collective comfort. It breeds distrust. Why do you see differently? Are you with us or with dark forces? Thus often the suspicion of witchcraft or devil's pact arises. The seer too might wrestle with existential loneliness. How frustrating to see what others cannot, or to carry foresight of dangers and not always be able to change them. Cassandra effect again. In our collected tales, every seer, or one who sought prophecy indeed, paid some price, and the recipients of prophecies likewise suffered. Those who believed too much lost freedom, Ellen and company. Those who didn't believe when they should, Trojan leaders ignoring Cassandra, or Stephen almost ignoring the traveler's warning, nearly lost life or did lose life. It's as if there's a razor's edge. A prophecy can save you or destroy you depending on how it's handled, and sometimes either way, you suffer some cost. Stephen was saved by the traveler's warning, but he went through terror and likely got a few grey hairs from that night. He'll never travel carefree again. The prophecy extended his life but stole his innocence on the road. Perhaps a fair trade, but a cost nonetheless. We might compare ancient sanctioned prophets, like the Oracle of Delphi's priestess, versus unsanctioned, like village fortune tellers. The Pythia Delphi was revered, given tributes, protected by temple and state. Yet even she had to be careful. One story says the Pythia was once asked who was the happiest man alive. The god through her named some obscure farmer who lived a simple life and died for his country. Implied, no great king is happiest, because knowledge of greatness brings burdens. The happiest mortals are those who live modestly, in harmony with fate, not seeking to transcend it. A subtle lesson: those outside the fray, no gift, no curse, may be most blessed. Similarly, consider Nostradamus in the Renaissance, celebrated now, but in life he was a bit of an odd figure, writing cryptic quatrains to avoid persecution. He had patrons but also detractors who thought he dealt with evil. Jean Dixon in the 20th century gained fame for seemingly predicting JFK's death, yet later was criticized for many misses, and in her personal life struggled with the weight of expectation to see things. In effect, she became prisoner to a public image, her later visions either ignored or scorned. She claimed her gift was from God, but also reportedly lamented the anxiety it gave her, knowing something like JFK's fate and not being able to prevent it weighed on her conscience, as per some accounts. The continuum from Cassandra to Dixon suggests society has a love-hate with prophets. It elevates and isolates them concurrently. A psychic today with real ability, if one entertains that possibility, might find it hard to have normal relationships, how to date or raise kids if you foresee personal tragedies, or constantly intuit truths behind people's words. Some mediums indeed suffer depression or substance abuse, perhaps as a coping mechanism for whatever sensitive empathic abilities or simply the emotional labor of handling clients' traumas every day. So perhaps the ultimate thin line is one of balance, to have intuition or foresight but not let it overwhelm humanness. Many an intuitive says they set boundaries. I don't read for myself. I switch off spirit communication at night to live a balanced life. That's a self-imposed rule to avoid the fate of a Tiresias or Cassandra. Comparatively, the ordinary person's relationship to prophecy remains double-edged. People buy a $10 reading for fun, gift, but if they take it too seriously, can become anxious wrecks, curse. One might check a horoscope to feel reassured, gift, but if it says something worrying and you fixate, curse. The line is often self-drawn. How much power do you give it over you? Recalling free will versus fatalism, the healthy approach seems to be using prophecy as guidance, not gospel. That's what modern ethical psychics advise. Take what resonates, leave the rest. You are in control of your destiny. They intentionally push the needle back to free will to avoid cursing someone with a self-fulfilling negative. All through, one hears that central paradox spoken of earlier. To know fate is to lose innocence. Adam and Eve biting the apple of knowledge lost Eden, a mythic framing of the same concept. They gained understanding of good and evil, maybe foreknowledge of death even, and with it came toil and mortality, a cursed trade. Yet without that fall, no human history, so it depends how one sees human purpose. Some philosophers argue that if we fully knew our fate, life would be robbed of spontaneity and meaning. Uncertainty is what allows morality, choosing without knowing the outcome for sure. Love, taking a risk on someone. Progress, striving not assured of success. Perhaps this is why virtually every culture's wisdom literature warns against trying to see it all. Not just out of fear of demons or fraud, but out of recognition that not knowing is an essential mercy. There's a poignant short story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, The Fortune Teller, where a man given the exact date of his death ends up living a half-life, paralyzed until that day arrives, and ironically dies more by his own anxious actions than by fate. It illustrates the chain. Knowledge can create outcome. Yet one might ask, what of genuine prophets revered as saints or bodhisattvas? They often suffer but are at peace with it, seeing it as service. Maybe the difference is accepting the burden voluntarily out of compassion. They wear the curse lightly as a gift to others. For example, some mystics in war-torn times, giving hope by saying, I see eventual peace. Even if they weren't sure, they bore that prophecy to help people endure, taking on perhaps their despair in private. Those are seers who channel visions for a higher cause, not for personal gain or even personal relief. In summary, walking that delicate boundary means approaching insight with humility and caution, understanding that foresight is a gift when it is used to guide and comfort, but a curse when it is wielded to control, or when one becomes enslaved by it. Every story we have encountered can be seen anew through this lens. Cassandra's tragedy lay not in her vision, but in her isolation. Had her truth been believed and acted upon, her curse might have transformed into a gift capable of saving Troy, though the myth itself demanded its fall. Marguerite of Saumur, condemned for her bone divination, might have been remembered as a healer if her warning had been received as a call to protect the child rather than a threat to be silenced. Instead, fear turned insight into accusation and compassion into scapegoating. The Edinburgh scryers treated their mirror as an amusement of science rather than a sacred threshold, and lacking reverence, they found that the veil they toyed with bit back. Marie Laveau, by contrast, held prophecy within the embrace of ritual and community, using it as a tool for balance and faith. Yet those who came after her, greedy to grasp her power without her discipline, found that her legacy carried dangers for the unworthy. The old Romani woman's warning in the Carpathians showed the opposite. Stephan's respect for her words saved his life, even if the encounter left him trembling. A rare case where the gift was accepted with fear and gratitude, and the curse thereby averted. And finally, in our own age, prophecy's misuse by modern psychics turned it into a machine of exploitation and despair until law and reason intervened to break the spell. A stark reminder that when foresight is severed from ethics, it ceases to be divine guidance and becomes human corruption. Finally, the stage is set to conclude with the deepest musing, that behind all these tales is perhaps a gentle divine design, that the future is hidden out of mercy, that we are meant to experience each dawn without full knowledge of its dusk, so we can live wholeheartedly. In the concluding section, under the metaphorical last candle flicker, we'll meditate on that notion and softly close with the idea that perhaps the greatest prophecy is that life goes on and tomorrow is a new blank page, a prophecy of uncertainty that is, in itself, merciful and hopeful. Night's deepest hours have passed. Imagine now that we sit together in a quiet hall as the first hints of dawn glow at the edges of the sky. On a wooden table before us, a single candle burns low, its flame steady and golden. All around is a gentle hush, the kind that precedes daybreak when the world holds its breath. In this liminal moment, we reflect on the long road we've traveled through stories and centuries, guided by flickers of prophecy's light, often led into shadow and back out again. Consider that candle's flame. It lights a small circle, revealing our immediate surroundings, faces, walls, the table's grain, but beyond its aura, the rest of the vast dark room remains hidden. This is our condition. We move through life with only a little pool of light, the present and maybe the nearest edges of the future guessed at by that glow. The rest lies in shadow, and perhaps that is kind. For imagine if this entire hall were flooded with harsh light, every corner and distance visible at once. We would see everything, yes, but lose all sense of depth, of wonder. The gentle focus would be replaced by an overwhelming of details. Our eyes, assaulted, might find no rest. So too with time. If every year of our life and its outcome were laid bare from birth, how could our soul handle that blaze of certainty? The beauty of becoming lies partly in not fully knowing what we will be, allowing surprise, growth, and the exercise of choice. Every civilization has intuited this truth and woven it into myth. In the Hebrew Eden, knowledge brings sorrow. The wise Solomon in Ecclesiastes laments, "In much wisdom is much grief." The Buddha, upon enlightenment, famously saw all his past lives and the workings of karma, a tremendous knowledge that fueled his compassion, but also confirmed that suffering is entwined with existence. Yet he offered not despair, but a path to navigate not knowing graciously. The middle way, mindful living in the present, compassion to bind us through uncertainty. We recall how every culture set boundaries around prophecy. The Delphic oracle gave riddles, the future seen through a glass darkly, to borrow St. Paul's phrase, as if to say, yes, there is pattern, but you must still live your way into its meaning. The Bible placed prophets under heavy responsibility and often isolation, implicitly cautioning that such sight is burdensome. Medieval and early modern laws, while partly to quash fraud, also implicitly told people, attend to your own moral life, do not obsess over fate, leave that to God. Perhaps these boundaries, these veils, were humanity's collective wisdom to prevent what we might call foreknowledge fatalism, a kind of paralysis or recklessness that comes when one thinks the future is fixed and visible. If Oedipus hadn't known of a prophecy, would he have still walked into it? The very steps taken to avoid it led him to fulfill it, an irony repeated in story after story. It suggests a design that trying to outrun fate by seeing it is often the surest way to fall into its arms. Meanwhile, those who humbly accept the unknown often find fate kinder. Consider how often unexpected grace enters at the last moment when one had no prophecy to lean on, but simple hope or resilience. In our narratives, even when prophecy saved someone, it did so by urging them to act. Stephen mustered courage to heed the warning. Ellen eventually found strength to break the psychic's hold. The prophecy was a tool, but the hero still had to choose and struggle. The future wasn't handed passively, it was shaped through response. Perhaps that is the subtle mercy. Prophecy, when it comes, is usually incomplete or symbolic, like a signpost, not a detailed map, leaving room for human endeavor, for the soul to exert itself. Picture again that single candle. Around its halo, gentle shadows dance. The flicker itself is alive because of darkness around it. Without darkness, light has no contrast, no meaning. In the same way, the future's uncertainty is the darkness that makes our small light of knowledge meaningful. We cherish each revealed moment precisely because the next is unknown and thus precious. Think of how we cherish free will. If every move were pre-scripted in bright letters before us, life might feel like a train on rigid tracks to a foregone conclusion. Some find comfort imagining destiny is set, but even those often live as if there's choice, because experiencing choice is integral to being human. A benevolent design, if one believes in such, might hide enough of destiny to allow genuine choice-making. The veil between knowing and becoming could be an act of love, protecting our minds from overload and our hearts from despair, while encouraging us to cultivate faith, courage, and creativity. In some spiritual teachings, it's said that if you truly knew all that was to come, there'd be no incentive to act. The soul would stagnate. Uncertainty fuels us, not in vain, but as the canvas for hope and effort. We plant seeds not sure which will sprout, and that very not knowing invest the act with optimism and adventure. Thus, perhaps the future protects itself not through secrecy, but through mercy. It's merciful that tomorrow remains largely undisclosed. Merciful that we wake each day with a realm of possibility, not a script. And merciful too that in times when a glimpse might help, as in some of our tales, the glimpse arrives, but usually in a cryptic or partial form, nudging rather than commanding. One might call that divine discretion. Give them enough to avoid catastrophe if they listen, but not so much as to remove all doubt and personal responsibility. Now the candle gutters low, its flame trembling as dawn's rays begin to overtake its light. Our long vigil of storytelling draws to a close, and we take one last quiet walk through the candlelit corridors of history we have traversed. In the fading glow, we see again the Yorkshire girl leaning toward her mirror on St. Mark's Eve, her face pale with fright as she learns that some questions are best left unasked. We pass Marguerite Pivet in the square at Saumur, her hands clutching the bones that once spoke to her, perhaps now wishing she had never cast them for that fatal glimpse of fate. In Edinburgh, Dr. Gilchrist stands amid the grey fog, carefully wrapping the obsidian mirror and putting it away, the death of his friend teaching him at last a reverence for mysteries not meant to be prodded. In New Orleans, Marie Laveau moves through her parlor, snuffing candles one by one after a long night of counsel, whispering a final prayer that those who came to her seeking answers depart not in dependency but in strength, for she surely understood both her power and its limits. Far away, a Romani wise woman climbs a mountain path as sunrise gilds her caravan, her warning delivered, her conscience light. She hums a soft tune about the twisting road of life and the grace that watches over those who listen to good counsel. And finally, in our own time, we find Ellen standing in the clean light of morning, her papers gathered, her debts counted, and yet within her a small flame rekindled, a determination to be her own guide from now on, to seek wisdom with discernment, and never again surrender her will to fear. Her life, once bound by illusion, belongs to her again. The curse is lifted in the moment she chooses to believe she is free. The candle's flame finally expires with a soft hiss, a thin wisp of smoke curling upward. In the east, the sun edges over the horizon, flooding the world with fresh illumination. The future, immediate and long-term, once again hides in that growing brightness, indistinct but promising. We step out of the hall into the morning. The air feels gentle and full of potential. We know not what this new day or the next may bring, and that is all right, even beautiful, because not knowing allows every good surprise, every earned triumph, every change of heart. We have, in a sense, come full circle to the opening of our meditation. Humankind's need to glimpse the future, and the cautionary tales of those who paid dearly for too clear a look. Now, at the end, we accept that need, but temper it with wisdom gleaned, that the shadow of foreknowledge has always reminded us of the preciousness of the present and the freedom in uncertainty. Tonight, when we light candles again, or when we gaze at stars, we might recall these stories and the steady truth pulsing through them. The future remains a mystery, not to punish us, but to guide us gently, to protect our humility, to foster our growth, and to let mercy and hope have space to blossom. So, as the sun fully rises and day begins, we blow out whatever remnants of divinatory candles we lit in curiosity, and step forward in time with trust. The veil between knowing and becoming flutters softly behind us, intact and benevolent. Perhaps that is how it is meant to be. In the silence after all the prophecies, we find ourselves, not burdened by fate, but graced with possibility. And with that thought, we carry onward, into the unwritten future where, mercifully, the last card is always blank. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey. From mirrors that whispered death to cards that burned their way through generations. From the mountains of Transylvania to the quiet rooms of the modern world. Every story carried the same warning. The future doesn't give up its secrets without taking something in return. Maybe that's why the unknown still calls to us. We stare into glass, into fire, into the endless scroll of what comes next, hoping for answers, knowing it might cost us, because deep down we've never stopped wanting to see. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. The goal is still 20,000 subscribers, so if you haven't yet, hit that button and help me keep building this archive of the strange. Until next time, sleep well, everyone, and remember, some doors are locked for a reason. In 2017, one of the most extraordinary paranormal stories of the modern internet age began unfolding in real time. An illustrator living in New York City claimed that the spirit of a dead child had entered his life, and over the months that followed, thousands of people watched as his apartment became the center of a haunting that seemed to grow more disturbing with every update. The boy appeared first in dreams, with a badly damaged head and a warning attached to his name, and after Adam Ellis broke the one rule he had been given, the disturbances seemed to follow him into waking life. The story became an obsession online, with people waiting for each new post, analyzing every photograph, and arguing over whether Adam Ellis was documenting something genuinely supernatural or pulling off one of the most convincing paranormal hoaxes ever seen. This is Dear David, one of the most famous modern hauntings ever documented online. The full episode is available now, exclusively on the Fall Asleep Podcast Patreon. Click the Patreon link in the description below to listen to the complete case. Dear David is the latest addition to our growing library of Patreon-exclusive episodes, joining 7 other terrifying and controversial paranormal cases, available only to members. You will also unlock the complete archive of more than 100 episodes, ad-free listening, and early access to every new release. The Fall Asleep Podcast on Patreon is your Netflix for scary podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe. Now back to the video.